Hello, let's see if this is working, shall we? Hello, everyone. We're going live a little bit early, but, you know, it works. And it's always nice to go live a little bit early if I can, because it means I can check if everything's working. And if it's working, I can do this. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Now, you'll notice there are leads all around the place, and yes, we are joined by currently a sleeping Fluffy Research Assistant. But he might wake up at some point. He's brought a bowl of food with him, a bowl of water with him, and everything else. So he doesn't have to be disturbed when we've drawn from here today. He can just enjoy the time. He does seem to be wanting to spend a lot of time with me at the moment. It's kind of nice. I've been a bit upset, a bit down the last couple of weeks, and a bit more since I've been back, and it's been nice having a Fluffy Research Assistant in close attendance, so that's quite good. Right, today is Patron 30, and they're in awe, Japanese hybrid warships of World War II. Worth building or a waste of resources. Now, I have stretched this title to its absolute limit because I'm looking at every single one of the Japanese conversions to try and talk about not just them in specifically, but also the wider Japanese naval aviation effort. And I am focusing on the aircraft carriers, but I will probably end up being drawn into, at some point, the pilot supply line issues and the various things they could have done to fix that. And recently, DRAC put up a civilian air patrol. I think it was for the of the US's during World War II, and that was modelled, of course, on various nascent programs in the US, which have been themselves modelled on various programs in Europe. And you sit there and go, did the Japanese try something like this? And the answer is sort of, in their own way, on a very, very tiny scale. And again, you would expect a country which is being quite so sure it is going to war to have done a lot more preparation on that front. Hello. You decided to come up now. You've heard everyone else is everyone's watching, so you decided to come up. Okay, well, let's say hello to everyone, and then we'll get into the actual topic, shall we? I don't know. Hello, Calvin Gesberg. Hello, Vision. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Let's see. Vision. Ironically, most sci-fi ships are hybrids, being between being carriers of light attack craft and having heavy armor and powerful ship-to-ship weapons. Yes, but the size and scale of most sci-fi ships, plus there's the fact that they're going in space. That means they need small craft, and always to even get down to a planet. The interesting thing, of course, is Star Trek, where, honestly, they try and get round it by depending on transporters, but you still need small craft. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello. I'm going to get that stuff out of your eye. Hello, Graham Highlander. Hello, Greg Sarsky. Let's see. Hello, DG40. Hello, Zachary Gherkin. Oh, good lord, the Blackburn here. Hello, Blackburn. Actually, you've got me into a bit of trouble today, because the picture I sent of you to Spreadshirt, which I know was taken in the 1920s, and so therefore is definitely out of the 70 years copyright. Definitely. They've rejected as a copyright infringement. So I'm having a nice look at them. But you will find, interesting announcement, Spreadshirt is live. But interesting enough, the two random designs I've put in, and I say random designs, one of them's got through, one of them seems to be coming through, and the three proper designs, which are actually based off the emojis and various other things I've done, it hasn't really liked, and they've all been rejected for various reasons, so I'm going to have to fix them and have another go. And I got news today. Didn't I? Yes, I did. Good boy. All right, let's move this so I can see the full length of the other screen. Right then, hello Sean V, hello Aussie Whiskers, hello Aussie Whiskey. The fluffy research is fine. Hello, it is Francis Fault. Hello Albert Zaski. Hello Felix B. Hello Jellingworth. Vision, Star Trek didn't have the budget for small craft till the hobby model company paid for the set and Shuttlecraft Model Bay. Yeah. That does help. That does help. You enjoying yourself? You just like being the center of attention, don't you? Yes, you do. Blackburn. The Japanese were so sure of their superiority over other nations that they did not take many losses, and once the other nations realized how superior Japan is, they'd surrender. Well, that is certainly an often portrayed trope. I'm not sure about its reality, and the reason I'm not sure about its reality is, as I'll get into this, if the Japanese were so sure about their superiority, they do take a number of preparations in certain areas, but don't do it enough, really. So they both make preparations as if they don't believe they're superior to everyone, but then they don't do them in enough. So they sort of do them but half-heartedly, and it's a case of, why? Thank you, Blackburn. If that would work and that was enough, that would be good for me. Seneca Nero, didn't most nations think that? Not really. If you've got the case of the US Navy, potentially, but definitely in sections. I don't think there's a large chunk of the US Navy, though, which is far more. Most navies tend to be quite realistic in terms of their appraisal, because you have to remember, most navies tend to come across other navies quite regularly. Usually you get such feelings, if you're going to get them anyway, in armies. And the reason that is because they don't fight each other until there's or really come across each other much, until there's actually a war, and then they go, oh, you guys are as good as us. We thought we were amazing. Whereas navies tend to come across each other regularly and get quite a good measure of each other in peacetime, which is also why it makes things, strategic planning for navies, that much more interesting. Hello, yes, we cleared your eyes out. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a puppy dog who likes to get stuff in his eyes. And that's what I was clearing out then, because he's actually on my lap and awake, so it's not cruel to go judging after it. Now, I was asking, one thing that came to me after watching the pre-live video, if you remove P and Q turrets from the ISO and put the funnels to the side, that'd make a large landing deck around 2/3 of the ship. It would. Also, and honestly, if you took those turrets, you could put an angled flight deck, as I said. And again, angled flight decks, whilst we think of them as something amazing which comes about post-World War II, they're really quite a logical progression. They're a way of getting a longer flight deck from the same amount of space. Because if you think about it, when you have a straight flight deck, you're dealing with a rectangle. An angled flight deck is going from one corner to the other, which is always going to be a longer distance than any of the sides in a rectangle, or even in a square. So it makes sense. It's a way of it's a very logical progression. Vision, will you touch upon the Soviet Kiev-class aircraft carriers hybrids towards the end of it? Nordic Wolf, howdy everyone. Hello, Nordic Wolf. This is Ron. Japan's whole strategy was hoping the US couldn't be bothered with them. Their whole strategy was hoping the US would be happy with the continent it had, basically. But that's the whole point. If a nation already has a continent, they might want more. They always want more. This is what I mean. They know they'll take some losses. All wars lead to losses, but there seemed to be a feeling that things would go to their plan and not their enemies. It becomes kind of interesting once you go through those things. But I'm assuming. Slightly related, but wasn't there a plan to turn Jeanne Bart into a hybrid carrier after her capture by the Allies? it was looked at to turn her into a carrier, not necessarily a hybrid carrier, but a full-on carrier. You don't want to carry in a battleship engagement. Someone forgot to tell HMS Formidable that. Well, yes, but she's an armoured carrier. They have a slightly different sensibility to these things. Hello, Ian Carr, and hello, Dr. Favonius. I'd say it depends on the size of the bird of prey. Right then, so here is the joyous thing, and as I was talking about earlier, I'm actually starting off not with the hybrids themselves, I'm starting off with some of the conversions. And this is Shitose and Shioda. Now, they start off as seaplane submarine carriers, i.e. they used to carry the mini submarines around on occasion. And they are cool ships. And they are a very logical place to start with a conversion, because if you think about it, they already have storage space, they already have fuel space, they already have pretty much everything built into them. All you need to do is build a flight deck and rearrange some ducting of funnels. And that's exactly what the Japanese do. Now, these aren't really planned to be converted into large light aircraft carriers, but they're building seaplane tenders. And I'm going to start off by explaining the point I made earlier. The Japanese could have got away with building as many seaplane tenders as they want, because to everyone's mind, a seaplane tender is last war's technology. And yes, I know, people are going to go, but they don't have the numbers of pilots. Well, the thing is, if you start out with a comprehensive plan of actually building seaplane carriers, which can be rapidly turned into carriers, if you're already doing that effort, you're probably going to put some effort into making sure you have a supply of pilots. Now, you could, of course, take a British or an American approach, but you could have taken a very Japanese approach to having a reserve pilot force, in that they have a lot of people who are willing to fly and who are interested in flying, and a lot of potential reserves. So they could have created a reserve. They could have created a reserve air wing. They could have called it many different things, but they could have even called their civilian air patrol if they wanted. But they could have got round a lot of the issues which they had by having a comprehensive plan for what would happen if things went wrong. Because that's really what you need. You do need a comprehensive plan always for what happens if things go wrong. It's one of the interesting issues we have today when we look at modern militaries, in that a lot of them do not have plans in place for what goes wrong, what comes next. When we're talking about even some of the world's bigger militaries in terms of numbers of personnel and equipment, they also seem to be lacking it, because they're often built around small quantities of very, very high-tech equipment and large quantities of far less high-tech equipment. What are you licking? Are you licking the varnish of the desk? Stop that. Sorry. Fluffy research assistant management needed it there. Hello, Derp Squad. Hi all. Did I miss the Great Observer? I'm sure you did. You never know. The Blackburn does appear. So, the interesting thing, of course, about Shitose and Chiyoda is that they are sunk at the Battle of Cape Agano. Now, I was considering doing a whole section on that battle in this video. I ended up deciding not to, because it's kind of predictable what happens. Sorry. Seriously, I'm glad you got down before you did that, but we couldn't have waited till later. Because you're behaving so well. And because I believe in bribery and corruption. Now, when it comes to dogs. Now, that is when they're being used as a distraction, along with Aize and Hyuga, the hybrids, for the Battle of Leyte Gulf. They look like bigger carriers from above, They aren't bigger carriers, but let's be honest, the pilots seeing them from a long way above, and they might think they're higher than they are, or they're further away, so they can confuse them. And the other ships, depending on if you're looking stern on or aft on, they could look like an aircraft carrier or a battleship. You don't know. Or you might actually realise that, oh, they're the hybrids. The thing is, it was very useful having that. Now, let's multiply these two vessels by, let's say, you build a couple, or at least one every year from 1932 onwards. In 1941, when you went to war, you could have had 9 sitting there and converted them quite quickly, quite easily, to light fleet carriers. And there is going to be a ship which we're going to get into which was specifically designed to be converted, and was. So it's nothing the Japanese didn't consider. So they could have done it. They actually did do it in limited capabilities, but they didn't do it enough. And this is a constant theme. Because here is the issue for Japan, and here is the reason why you have the hybrid carriers. They do not have enough industrial infrastructure to expand production in wartime to both grow and manage losses. In fact, they don't even have enough to manage losses. So, your only solution, your only option, is to start preparing in peacetime. And if you have to do that secretly, well, Japan doesn't seem to worry about that in other matters. So why do they worry about it in this? Again, it comes down to an extent, an underestimation in their wider structure of how much damage they're going to take. But also, I think there are quite a fair number of people who are very realistic about their war capabilities and are worried that if they build up capabilities too quickly and too massively, that the people who are pushing for war will overestimate their capabilities. I think your mic pickup is a bit high. I'm sorry about that. Let me turn it down a bit. Hopefully that's better. If not, we'll just keep going down a bit. Hopefully that is better. Sorry. It could have got knocked or something when the doggy got off. I don't know. Seneca Nero, submarine carriers. Yes, the reason I'm calling them submarine carriers is occasionally they're dispatched in pre-their pronunciation, pre-their conversion with the mini submarines there. Chitose. Chitose, I know. I'm not sure what I was pronouncing it as. I was doing it wrong. French one. The French battleship Dunkirk and Strasbourg had good aviation facilities at the stern. The La 130 flying boat was pretty big and capable, like a Starfleet shuttlecraft. That's good, but the varnish is tasty. The varnish is not good for you. Seneca, pilot reserve. Like in Germany, you still can get a pilot's license with 12 years. There are options. Veteran assuming. Weren't Chitose and Shioda assigned to a carrier division? Wouldn't that indicate some sort of intention about conversion? As they were seaplane carriers, they were all assigned to a carrier division. The seaplane carriers are assigned to carrier divisions because that's the administration for them. But again, it would suggest a sort of intention to convert, and the fact that they are converted would suggest there was a contention. But there is a debate as to whether they were specifically designed with conversion in mind. You have to remember, seaplane tenders, the treaty is interesting when it comes out. Tarantalanko. The IJN developed some very high-performance float planes in World War II. Kowalski N1K1 Kofu and Rex float plane became the N1K2 Shan Kai George. Richard, the Chitose class were actually designed with several future conversions in mind. The reason I am being as fence-sitting as I am, or whether they were or weren't, is that, and this is one of the problems, joys you get in history. in academic history, we tend to have a rule about references information. You must remember that a lot of National Archives, in terms of Japan, their archive material for World War II was got rid of. And also a lot of the senior officers who were involved in the procurement disappear, or get killed, or die, etc. So, whereas I can be fairly sure and honest and tell you that the Royal Navy's fleet auxiliary tankers were designed with all sorts of conversions in mind when they were started being built in the late 1920s, and those conversions, by the point at which Henderson's in charge, are very much in mind for converting them to aircraft carriers, auxiliary aircraft carriers. With the Japanese, I cannot say. So, you can get some authors who can write in books and go, look, it's obvious because we do know and do have proof about this other vessel, which I'll be getting to in a bit, that it was that was a plan, and these vessels are built along a similar line. And the fact they're converted does add evidence and leans it to the possibility and probability that they were planned on being converted. But the thing is, they do leave the conversions kind of late in the war for that if they were planned. Honestly, they are put through a lot of use. And then when they're converted, there isn't really an air group for them. So, they are converted in 1943. The war's been going on for 2 years, roughly, by that point, at least the 18 months mark. In which case, that's kind of well into the war. When, in terms of the other ones, they tend to be converted a bit earlier. It reminds me of the US versus Iran war game, where the Marine General destroyed half the US fleet in the first day. Weren't they Israel? Weren't they simulating Israel, not Iran? Just to give them a more viable threat. Interesting to see what the current war game is going on. Doctor, I feel like training personnel is exponential. I think the Japanese never hit the critical number to rapidly expand. Yes and no. They never put in really any infrastructure in to rapidly expand or brought back the veterans for the training to help with rapid expansion and bringing up the level of their new people coming in. So, this is the problem. Japan has structural issues when it comes to its aircraft and its pilots. Hello, Bug Guy 882. Hello, were there any treaty limits on seaplane carriers? Well, this is the interesting thing. If I bring up my notes. What you find very quickly when you start looking for seaplane carriers is that, well, first of all, you start looking at the definition of aircraft carriers. No aircraft carrier exceeding 27,000 tons shall be constructed. Armed aircraft carriers. What are an aircraft carrier? All these things. At a certain point, you start to realize that seaplane carriers aren't really... They're a grey area in the treaty system. There is HMS Ark Royal, which becomes Pegasus, a Royal Navy seaplane carrier wandering around, which is always a sort of grey area. And the treaty system, seaplane carriers are a grey area. There are some specifics which you would expect to apply to them, but they can sort of seem to get away with it. It's an interesting thing to dig into. At some point, I've got to do a whole video, and probably with the help of John Jordan's books, have a look at the grey areas of the naval treaties and how they were shamelessly exploited. Probably get Drac involved for that one. I hear there seems to be a growing suggestion for a battle cruiser one. I think for that one, for that video, what we might want to do is get Jamie involved or someone else as the umpire with the questions from you to actually hold us to actually having questions rather than going off into a lovely discussion, which we probably would do of various other things. We'd probably get distracted by the stuff we agree on. So, the Taiyo class. Now, the joy of the Taiyo class, or the Taiyo, is that these ships are technically built as cargo liners. However, again, they are all planned from the beginning to be able to be converted into escort carriers. In fact, one is converted on the stocks. There is Shuyo here, which is originally the Nitamaru. And she's sunk by the sailfish on the 4th of December 1943. But she's commissioned as a carrier in November 1942. And this, I think, lends credence to the idea of some ships were potentially built with it potentially in mind, and some were built to convert to carriers. And I think the Chitose class comes in the potentially convert to carrier mind, whereas the Taiho class, or as they would have probably been originally, the Nitamaru class, were planned to be converted to aircraft carriers. But they are sunk by the sailfish, the barb, and the rasher. So that's Chuyo, Unyo, and Taiyo. All sunk. Hello, Frederica Vega. Raparizak. Japan should have looked at ships they could quickly convert to military use. Well, they did. Jisun, you had said Shitose, and the shit is like cheese. Sh would be like she. I was asking. It's perfect now. Thank you. I'm presuming that's the sound. Frederick, any reason they didn't feel like getting rid of both amidships turrets in the Azes? We'll get to them. We will get to that. And honestly, we will get to that, and I will probably be ranting about that at some point. Would a destroyer mine layer be a hybrid warship? Not particularly. Oh, Richard, my reference is A.J. Watts in 1970. I know. I can follow lots of references back to A.J. Watts in 1970. He does make that point, and I can see where he's drawn it from. But my reference is... Well, how do I put this politely? My reference is one of my colleagues from King's College London when I talked to him, called Alessio Patalano. And he is very clear about what was planned and what was potentially planned whenever I've had this discussion with him. And so I go on that one. And I know AJ Watts is a good historian. I enjoy his stuff. But I think on this one, as I said before, it's very difficult to define because so many documents are missing from Japan, and because you can go, well, they were converted, so they obviously were. Again, I think there's a difference between ships which were planned to be converted, like these, which were planned to be converted into escort carriers, or smaller carriers for convoying. Seems to be an idea which quite a lot of nations have in the late 1920s, early 1930s, to use merchant jet hulls and convert them into small ships for escorts. But the Japanese, the Japanese have a sort of difference between, again, the Royal Navy, as I've been talking about, they're supposed to convert their oilers. That's their plan. And then when you look at it, they go Mac ships, they go all sorts of things. They never actually convert the oilers, mostly because they've already been converted to amphibious ships or other things, or they're just too important as oilers. But why do they have the plans drawn up to convert oilers? Because what's the civilian ship that the Royal Navy actually owns and builds and understands in the 1920s and 30s? It's oilers. It takes them a while. You have to wonder if it hadn't been Fraser, if it had been Henderson, or someone a little more lateral thinking in charge of as Third Sea Lord, whether it would have taken them that long to come up with it. But Oh, and this is off topic, but there is a gentleman who keeps writing on various videos that I am undoubtedly pro Navy, pro Royal Navy. I would just like to, if he's watching this one, for him to go and watch anything where I'm talking about Admiral Fraser, anything where I'm talking about Admiral Beatty. There's a few other admirals who've come up recently as well, but those Lord Corkenori, I don't like to say that much. No, the Royal Navy does, but you have to remember again, Royal Navy isn't a panacea, but the Royal Navy does get things very right in theory for them. They still can't always deliver because they don't have the time or the money. It's the same with the Japanese Navy. They're not stupid. I think there was one person who wrote on this that, Japan couldn't do anything because the army and the navy are constantly like gangs fighting each other and therefore they couldn't produce something. Well, no, as these examples show, the Japanese understand their strategic situation. They are trying to manage as best they can, but there is a limit to what you can do with their scenario. It's kind of like the Germans. Whenever me and Drac end up talking about their potential war plans, and it usually goes to the Drakenfell Scharnhorst plan and the Evolved Scharnhorst plan rather than the Bismarck and Tirpitz, which is a good idea. But the reason why the Germans are forced to do that is because they can no longer build more than 2 large ships at a time because their infrastructure just doesn't exist. That's the problem. That's the limitation. Why are the Americans, even if they gave, and one person commented this and I agree with them, even if they gave their entire navy in 1939 to the Royal Navy, by the end of World War II, they'd still be the second largest navy in the world. Broadly speaking, the Canadians would also be fairly massive. Because they can build so much, because they have so many yards. Basically, the problem for Japan is the same problem as for Germany, and frankly, the only Axis power which arguably has less of this problem is Italy, but they're the ones who have the least resources to actually put into the building. So, there is a reason why the Italian Navy is the most well-rounded, most capable Axis Navy in 1939 until the Japanese entered the war. And there is a reason B why the starving of resources going to the Italian Navy was possibly the most stupid thing the European Axis powers did. But we're on the Japanese. Hello, Melanie 1640. In Carl, what are the Japanese army carriers? What's good use made of these? Not really, but we'll get into that. Derp Scott, how factionalized was the Japanese leadership pre-1941? Read Japanese archives. US Army Air Force firebombing of major cities has something to do with the missing archives. Yes, and the Japanese themselves are growing. Factionalized, heavily factionalized. Unable to do their jobs? No. There is a difference. They can. This is one of the interesting things. They can viciously hate each other and still carry out their jobs with a high degree of professionalism. They'll just shoot each other out after work. Death Squad. No, it was Iran. Millennium Challenge. The Marine Corps general was trying to make the point that the entire US Armed Forces was set up to fight a normal war, but no one was going to be stupid enough to fight the US on its own terms and into its strength. That sounds like a US Marine Corps general thinking. Sentinel. Nicholas Wu, hello. Hi. Would I say Hugo have been better if the ships had islands and a proper flight deck as actual CVs? Yes, they would have been, but we'll get into that at some point. Frederick, there you go. The Japanese army had to have carriers. How would you trust the navy with them? Yes, the army had carriers and they manned them themselves. They crewed them themselves. John South, weren't all aircraft carriers cargo ship? The cargo being explosive that they even have a delivery system just like Amazon and their drones. He. You've got a point. Rankash, Dr. Clark, now lockdown is being eased. When are you sending out invites for the shed warming party? Well, my mum and sister are still shielding and are still protected, but possibly late September we will have something. Late September, maybe early October. I might get Drac round and we might have a live stream of both of us. Because it's slightly easier to do it in my shed than it is in his broadcasting facilities. Because my shed, we've got a gap between us and other people. And so we'd be less annoying to neighbours. Hopefully. Hopefully. Remissing archives. Allied on taunt bombing and international torching accounts much of the missing IJ and Austro-Hungarian archives. Yeah, they did do quite well. The UK burned vast amounts in the 1950s for no good reason. Okay, it cost too much to keep. Pretty much. Don't worry. Greg, I have regular bursts of pure fury come to me in the National Archives when I find documents have not been kept because they were judged not necessary for the nation. And there are whole meetings of Sea Lords where the minutes have disappeared. Colin Zad, greetings from New Bedford, Massachusetts. Hello. Seneca, there is a reason the Royal Navy dominated the globe for most part of the 19th and 20th century. You can't do that with incompetent people. True, you also can't do that without having a huge amount of logistics and infrastructure in place. Raparizak, Japan started a war of attrition for which was ill-equipped. We'll be getting into that. Now, here is the army. Yes. There's the Shinzu-maru, possibly the first ever amphibious assault ship. But may I introduce you to the Akitsu-maru? Yes. You're thinking, surely the Japanese didn't come up with an LHD as well as an LPD. Well, the truth is they didn't. It's not got a dock. But it is an amphibious transport ship which has a flight deck which underneath you can store planes on the old main deck, and you can carry either 30 aircraft in transport or 8 as an aircraft carrier. Not quite sure how it works out to that one, but that's what it does work out to. And this is operated by the Imperial Japanese Army, so those questions were rather timely. Yes, that is the Army's aircraft carrier, and if you think that looks like a modern Japanese carrier, you would not be mistaken. They do look really similar. Anyway, it's a passenger line taken over before completion by the Imperial Japanese Army. It's eventually sunk by USS Queenfish. It displaced 11,800 tons standard. As said, it could carry 8 as an aircraft carrier and 30 as a ferry. And these ships are put in service well before you would think they were. Okay? The Shinzu-maru, of course, is in service in 1937. This is developed and in service in 1942. It's actually completed in service in 1942. It's sunk by 1944. But this is the point. The Japanese have good ideas. It's actually having the infrastructure, money, and ability to implement them. That is their problem. Right then. And then this one from Dotescott. When you read up on it, it's just a joke. Iran had so many stupid limitations imposed after the restart, it was going to be clear easy win. Then the US had users to justify doctrine. Yes, the old, we lost the exercise, so let's redo the exercise with new rules so we can't lose it. Send again. Access plan. All of the resources for the German Navy go to the Italian yards. To be honest, especially the yards in the Adriatic, were pretty darn secure and safe for a large chunk of the war. They could have churned out stuff if they had a lot more supplies. And it would have been very problematic for the Allies to deal with surface ships in the Mediterranean. But again, to get out and get anywhere useful, they'd have had to go past Gibraltar. which, as if anyone's following Drax's Twitter feed at the moment, will notice that it has a rather large collection of large guns on it. There's what asking. I was surprised how many more carriers Japan had than the 6 from Pearl Harbor attack and the early experimental versions. Oh, they had a lot of carriers. Because Japan realized it needed aviation. That was their silver bullet to their force multiplier. Did Japan have shipbuilding infrastructure in China? Not really. They had a little bit in Korea, but not really in China. Veteran assuming, if appropriate, what's the major differences rounding capabilities wise between IJN and original Marine in the 1940s? Which was the better? Well, the IJN is the better because they're far bigger and they have more capabilities in every single level. However, there are some specific designs of the Ranger Marina which are probably slightly better. The fact is, though, the Ranger Marina has no carrier arm. They never complete their aircraft carriers, and that would have been really quite useful. Because whilst, yes, you're operating in the Mediterranean where you're always in support of land-based aircraft, but you always have to remember land-based aircraft take a time to reach out to you. That means they're using fuel on the way. And then they're using fuel on the way back. So there's only so long they can stay with you, which is why Royal Navy task groups with a carrier battle group with a carrier with them often could deal with the various, how do I put it, the theoretically massive outweighing and outnumbering of the Axis air power because it would never reach it in that sort of a state. Whereas the carrier strike could be ordered from the carrier to attack the enemy ships. Well, A, at a close range, B, knowing who they are, and C, under the same command structure as the ships involved. All that made a big difference. And as Karl Gazvax pointed out, the Italian Navy infrastructure, they inherited not only their own, but the Austro-Hungarian infrastructure. Unfortunately, but without the Czech armour and artillery factories, i.e. Skoda works. Senator, what do you think of the USS Kearsarge from World Warships? I haven't yet played it. Death Squad, the civil servants involved had tried to stick to the original plan to digitalize records. That plan didn't really exist in the 1950s. There was no real plan to digitalize records in the 1950s. That comes into existence in about the 1980s, 1990s, that they start to talk about digitalizing records. No, it was a space. They were moving to the new archives, National Archives in Kew, the new building. And there's only so much space. And they were allocating it based on the ministry proportion of records. And there's only so much space you could fit in there. And it's still got to take on. And honestly, they need to expand the National Archives again. Because it's running out of space. Even with the digitalization of records. Content. New Bedford, former whaling town next to the battleship cove in Fall River. I get to see the big Mamie whenever I like, and I've been taking advantage. Enjoy. John South, Akitsu Maru reminds me of HMS Ocean. It does as well remind me of HMS Ocean. Basically, anyone would think that the Japanese managed to develop a good amphibious warfare doctrine philosophy prior to World War II, and the ships to try and implement it. But the trouble is, they don't ever have enough ships. Really, you need about 4 or 5 Shinzu Marus. And you need about another dozen Akitsu Marus to back them up. Or equal numbers, a dozen of each. To be really able to land significant forces in opposed scenarios. Because if you did have that number, then I'm sorry, there are lots of people who say things like, oh, the Japanese could not have landed a couple of divisions at Pearl Harbor. Well, if you have that number of those vessels, which again were not covered by treaty, amphibious ships were not limited by treaty. They're not even part of the treaties. Have a look through them. amphibious shipping doesn't really come in. The whole point is they are specialist vessels, and therefore they're considered limited uses, and they're not really part of the treaty. Mm-hmm. 1960-40. No one will ever want to know what the Sea Lords discussed in these meetings in the future. Let's consolidate records with some petrol. In answer to your question of Calm Gasper, whether that's a twin-engined aircraft on the back of the Kitsumaru, I'm not 100% sure. I think it might be. When I'm looking at the really zoomed-in version, it does look to me like one, but honestly, it's very grainy. So I could be wrong. It could just be the shadow. And the trouble is, there is no detailing underneath where I got the picture from. Because as you know, I grabbed the pictures from Wikipedia, because that way I know I'm not going to get into too much trouble. Because my theory is, if the picture's on Wikipedia, people can't really complain if I'm using it for education. Let's see. I like it that they partially finance a pair of passenger lines that can be converted into quite fast medium capacity carriers. They weren't the only ones. They were not the only ones. Nyoka 472. Could the flight deck of a hybrid carrier be cantilevered out over the turrets? Also, have you read Far After and Faintly, an old history on Dutch hybrid carriers? No, I haven't read that. I've got it on my list to read. And could the flight deck of a hybrid carrier be cantilevered out over the turrets? I wouldn't like to do that. I would not like to do that. It sounds like a very complicated system to cause you a lot of trouble. That's good. The issue isn't building a slipway, it's everything around the slipway. Building new slipways at a dockyard is hard, as usually towns go around when people like keeping their houses. Even in Japan, you have issues. And also you have to have flat, stable land next to the ocean. And that's also where people like to build houses, where people like to build office blocks, where people like to build commercial districts, and ports, which tend to be places which have lots of merchant ships going around. And suddenly you realize where you have the issues. Now, Britain has a small advantage in this. If you consider things like camel leads. Liverpool is the commercial hub, and that's on one side of the Mersey. On the other side, on the Wirral side of the Mersey, there is Birkenhead, and there is Camel Leads. That's a huge advantage if you can have the port one side and the huge, great big shipyard the other side. And Britain has a few places like that. But again, Britain has a lot more flat land than Japan does, and it's a lot more stable as a rule. Hello, Rick Vasava. Decision. I'm sure someone has done some old history stuff of Kitsumaru carrying a squadron of troops carrying large autogyros. I don't think I remember that. As I see, Japanese army carriers, maybe the British Expeditionary Force should also have their carriers and shore bombardment battleships as a way around the Washington Naval Treaty. Yeah, that wasn't... Probably not shore bombardment battleships, but actually aircraft carriers again. The British Army could possibly have got away with, as long as they were troop ships, and very limited. In car, were Italian carriers as part built with wood or armored steel decks? They were conversions and seemed to have normal steel rather than armored steel or wooden decks, from what I've seen on them. Discord, re-record demonstration. We were talking about the Windrush landing cards. Oh, don't get me started on that lovely procedure. That was really, really silly. Ay, caramba. That was in the 90s, and that's just. That costs nothing. New IKB 4472. Solution to the archive storage problem in 1950s would be lots of microfilm. That was considered, but it was considered too labour intensive and expensive and not worth it. As Melanie has pointed out, why would people be interested in this in 40 years' time? John South, so what you're saying is the RN should have put a small dock on the back of HMS Ark Royal and then press copy and paste until they had at least 20 of them. These ships are all quite small. They're all in the roughly 10,000 tons range. Anything bigger than that, I don't think you could have got away with it. Comes out, did the IJN get any sort of use from this fleet of converted ships aircraft carriers? Seems to me the Japanese were bereft of skilled pilots at that point, no? No, they had a few going around. Not as many as they needed, but a few. That's often some. Hello. Right, and this is the Kao, originally the Argentina Maru. So you can guess what she was for. Yes, she really is. She was a merchant ocean liner. She's purchased by the IJN on the 9th of December 1942. She's a long-range ocean liner. Her job is to sail to Argentina and back to Japan by the Southern Pacific route. And she's converted this she's purchased in 1942 because for some reason no one's running a trip to Argentina at the moment from Japan by this point, and she's converted into an escort carrier, the Kao. She's acquired on 9th December 1942. She's commissioned November 1943. She actually is stricken in November 1945. She's 13,000 tons. And she can carry 24 aircraft. Now, the aircraft she normally carries depends on what convoy she's escorting. But she's part of the convoy escort for HI-33, HI-57, and a few others. And she does fairly well. You know, escort carriers are not a British-American allied invention. Other nations have been thinking about this in the interwar period and have come to similar solutions and have worked on it. I would say getting together an air group for her must have been interesting by the point she's in service. But they do seem to. And she has a decent flight deck. It's 2 feet wide. It's fine. She's got 2 aircraft elevators, which frankly most escort carriers would have loved. Whilst doesn't have an island, she can operate the 24 aircraft, and as said, again, the aircraft tend to be what's available more than necessarily what you might want. But it works. So, Chris Sassy, a colleague got a copyright notice because he used a public domain photo, which was also used in a TV documentary. So, of course, it was a content match. Again, I don't think there's been any documentaries on the Blackburn done. Rangash, would love to see a conversion of a battleship with wing turrets just to put the runway straight down the middle. Oh, God, don't put that out there, Roland. Someone will actually draw it and give me nightmares. Don Giovanni, hello. Can you build a coffer dam as a new shipyard place? Probably. I've seen a few places which are basically use a coffer dam. Vision. Ferry across the Mersey. Japan is twice the size of Britain with half the usable land as Britain. Pretty much. Because, as Seneca Near is, but Japan is basically a mountain chain sticking out the ocean. Mountain, volcano, we can quibble. There aren't battleships, they are long-range artillery shells. Oh, good lord. Carl Harmon. Dr. Clark, where have you been for the last few years? Well, mostly for the last 18 months and 2 years here. Before that, wandering around various archives, having arguments with people. Mostly other academics who are being silly. So get a bunch of modern LHDs and claim they be amphibious ships and sneak them past the treaty. Take care, Stafford. Hope you're on a good lunch. And thanks for popping in. I don't think you can quite get them past the treaty, but it could be fun to try. Were any of the conversions converted back to the original purpose after the war? Yes, a fair number were. In fact, I think... I'm not sure, but might have been a Taio class, might have actually been a picture from them after the war. Let's see. No, I don't think that's the right one. Oh, that's gone for that one. Escort carrier, got it. No, they might not have been. No, none of that. They were all sunk, but there were ones which I converted back. I know. I've got a picture of it coming up somewhere. But no, the Caio de Argentina Maru, she's a good ship. She's useful. She carries a useful. This is a useful escort carrier, and again, it's one of those things when you get into it. The Japanese have the ability and the doctrine. What they haven't got is the structures, and they haven't. They thought about it, but they haven't thought about enough depth. It's one of those things. If you have a fundamental belief, you are going to go to war, and you're going to end up going to war with America, and they are so much bigger than you. Then what you have to do is you have to ensure you have enough advantage that you can still match anything they produce for the first couple of years of war to try and smash them as hard as you can so you can secure what you've built. But they don't. Death Squad. Rewinners Landcraft. They were destroyed in 2010. The original plan was drawn up in 2009. Gunn was warned of the problems they were creating and did it anyway. Yeah, but I think they've been planning on digitalizing them since about 1990s. Senator Canero, getting an ocean liner with a flight deck on top would be a cool experience. In car, first escort carrier, HMS Audacity was a conversion of a captured German liner. What's prize money paid? Don't think so. Shumi, a BB with wing turrets and a flight deck. I have cat open. Oh my lord. You're even disrupting the fluffy research assistant's sleep with that suggestion. Probably, Stafford. They would have at least 5-minute warnings, 5 minutes of visual content warnings at the beginning of any documentary on the Blackburn. Why would a cantilevered flight deck over the turrets cause a problem? Because how are you going to elevate the guns? And when you fire the guns, what's going to happen to the flight deck? The Rio. As she's originally built, and as she becomes. Now, the Rio is definitely built to be converted. Originally, she's built as a submarine tender. Another class of ship which is not in any way at all restricted by the Washington Treaty. You can, basically, if you call the ship a tender and it doesn't really have more than self-defense weapons on it, i.e. seaplane tender, submarine tender, destroyer tender, there is virtually nothing limitation on it, what you can build, on numbers you can build. You just can't come out looking like that from the get-go. So, built to be converted. Again, with stores, fuel, all these things built in. It's brilliant. However, due to her small size, slow speed, and weak construction, she is actually one of the least successful of the light aircraft carriers. But she displaces 16,000 tons. So you'd expect it to be quite good. She could carry 31 to 36 aircraft. That's great. But her top speed was 26.5 knots. That's not so great. And that's her designed top speed. Yeah, no one actually wants to try and get her up to it because she wobbles like anything. So they have the right idea, as I was saying with the Chitose class. They are there. They have the idea. They just execute it poorly. Ryan Cash, where did the hybrids fit into the IGN system of seaplanes for scouting and fleet carriers for strike and torpedo cover? That we're going to get to when we get to the hybrid carriers. We are getting to the hybrid carriers, but I'm going through all the other conversions first. So I'm laying the groundwork. Then assuming a company bought an old French aircraft carrier and plans to make it a private yacht, capable of landing on it, with a pool under a moving section of the flight deck. I hope not. I think that's probably a myth. That's a myth. There's no real old French aircraft carrier wandering around that's suitable for conversion. If the Iron got large enough, would they put an Ocean God King over the various Sea Lords? No. They just go back up to the full 5 first Sea Lords, maybe a 6th even. Cash, where did the hybrids fit in the... answer that one. Mm-hmm. Well, Roller Digital. I'm guessing had helicopters been invented in World War II, they would not have been needed at hybrid ships. Well, here's the glorious thing. Helicopters were invented well before World War II. There were various types of them. They weren't practical before the end of World War II. In fact, it's the 1950s and really the 1960s that helicopters start to become practical and operational tools. Prior to that, they were very interesting systems, and you have the Germans even have a gyrocopter system which they can fly off their submarines to use as a scout for their submarines, a sort of self-assembly system that they build, or that they basically bring out in sections from inside the submarine, assemble and attach by tether to the sub so they don't lose it, and then someone has to go up in it. We can all think about A, how brave that person was, and B, this is what they had to do to get round the very simple facts that submarines are very low to the water and the Earth is round. Don Giovanni, can you build a cruiser tender with 8-inch guns for self-defense? Sadly, no. Then assuming first use of helicopters in combat is search and rescue by American hoverflies in 1944 in Burma. Cool. Concept. I wouldn't say either side really used them in World War II. I wouldn't say any nation really used helicopters in World War II. There were some very interesting examples of them turning up and being made use of, but as a coherent usage, not really. I guarantee you someone out there would have thought such problems were easy to solve and could have convinced those with the power to get them built. That they were right. Possibly, but we'll try and avoid that one. I'm not sure it's French, but it exists. They had an official announcement of plans and everything. I swear I'm not making up. I don't doubt you are. It could well be the Brazilian one. That's the old French then Brazilian vessel. There are options going around. It's just the French haven't sold off an aircraft carrier in a long while. Seneca Canera, the Earth is flat. No. Greta, I think there's one in Cosford. Monday 60 Why would they do that versus just raising the periscope and using that while surfaced? Because that still doesn't go high enough, and that actually creates a very interesting thing in terms of balancing your submarine. And remember, periscope is designed to be raised through water. Once it's up in the air, that's a lot of weight you have quite high up. Admittedly, it's not really enough to act as a sail, but it's interesting. And it can't get anywhere near as high as a gyrocopter. WSGR3, why? I say in Hugo stream? Yes, we're getting there. Senator, are drones used by modern subs for scouting? Well, modern subs don't like to go anywhere near the surface, so not at the moment. So there are various ideas of them. There are various ideas of having facilities to launch, but they don't yet have them really in service. Patreon, US used helicopters at the very end of the war. Photo of one over captured U-boat at New England port. All right, Richard. U-boat also drivers reminded of the USN's hilarious Dash fiasco. I witnessed some very humorous training accidents. There have been so many things which have caused training accidents over the years. Nicholas, in real life, most of the Fox Angeles choppers were in a factory which got bombed. They looked like they would have been scary, though, like a modern autogyro. Yeah, pretty much. Tobias Geoffrey. Wait, you're... Rapper is right. I find it interesting the RN doled out carriers at the end of the war and USN kept theirs. Well, to be honest, the reason the RM was doling out carriers was they were trying to hold on to the better ones they could and trying to get the money in so they could build the Maltas. So the idea was if they sold off carriers and everyone else was operating carriers, it would give them more arguments to build the decent ones which they were hoping to build. Because if they got the Maltas built, that would have set them up for about the next 40 years. Probably the rate of Britain's replacements the next 50. Patron, Sikorsky R4 helicopter was put into mass production in World War II by the USA. We'll call it semi-mass. The USK got some, used them in Burma. Yes, it's a round tube. Water is much more vicious, so I'd think of less of an issue in air. Yes, but what you have to remember is a submarine is not a normal ship in terms of stability in water. So you put that much weight high up in the air, and if you're in calm waters, fine. If you're in less than calm waters and you're already shifting about a bit, that can add momentum. Well, let's put it this way. It can function momentum and it can cause you all sorts of issues. Chris Lockup, thank you. Thanks for all you do to open minds, inspire thoughts, and reading. Apologies for not being able to stay today. Don't worry. So, the Rio is interesting. But the point is, as I'm often trying to make, and this can be explained, people can take this as me saying that these people are all perfect and amazing, is it honestly doesn't take that amazing a genius to work out what the problems are going to be. Most average admirals should be able to come up by the time they spent that time in service and work out the problems. It's getting the solutions through Parliament and through the various procurement process that sets you apart as a genius or not. And that's why I rave about Admiral Henderson. Because he is able to get things through procurement. And it's one of those interesting scenarios. What would he have got through if he'd been around a bit longer? Who knows? But admirals like that are far rarer than admirals who are good at strategy and good at seeing the problems. So it's kind of like the modern scenario where, well, it's very easy. Me, Jamie, and Drac do it quite regularly in build trumps. Look at the world and work out what the problems are from a naval perspective. The problem is, we can see the solutions. Anyone can really see the solutions. The difficulty is persuading other people to fund those solutions. That's the art form. That's where the skill comes in. And that's where the poor Japanese have a lot of trouble, because they don't just have to persuade to get the money. They have to persuade to find the infrastructure to do it. Now, the Shimame Maru class. Well, this is a sort of more another interesting scenario. Basically, the Japanese plan 6 conversions, but they only build 2. And they're similar to the Max ships in that they take 2 tankers, and they're modified to provide anti-submarine air cover to submarines going from Southeast Asia to the Japanese homeland. Conversion consists very simply of a small hangar deck, a single elevator, and a full-length flight deck, which was slightly interesting. Both ships were lost. The Shimame Maru is sunk by British aircraft on the 24th of July, 1945. And the Otkase Maru is scrapped 1948, but she's never commissioned because she's basically damaged under construction. The interesting thing about the Shimame Maru is she's actually completed on the 28th of February 1945 and is sunk in Shido Bay in the Kawa Prefecture on July 1945 by British aircraft. They then mined her hulk, and she scrapped in Nawana. Daiju Maru and Tasha Maru were laid down, but construction was never completed. Their top speed would have been 18.5 knots. They would have been able to do 10,000 nautical miles at 10 knots, and they were supposed to carry 12 aircraft. They're a cool idea. The Daiomaru, as you can see, Daiomaru is one of the ones which is completed post World War II as a tanker. So she is laid down December 1944. Construction stopped in February 1945, and the construction is restarted in 1949. And she serves till 1964 as the Rio Maru. If Japan wants to convince someone they don't have carriers, they need to stop naming the new amphibs after carriers. Tobias GL3, why? Do the Japanese torpedo cruisers fall under this hybrid category, or are they a nightmare in and of themselves? A nightmare in and of themselves, because technically they're cruisers, but they're not armed like cruisers, so they're a bit interesting. 9640. Actually, that's an interesting point. Submarines of World War II had hulls designed to be on the surface the vast majority of the time. They really were more submersibles than submarines, weren't they? Yes. The trouble is they weren't designed to be on the surface in very rough seas. They were supposed to be able to slip underneath it during those to get out of the storms. So they were designed to be on the surface in relatively calm waters, i.e. not the North Atlantic. And not with a huge, great big weight high up in the air. Tobias Jeffrey, why does the flight deck look like a wet noodle? I have no idea. I'm not sure if that picture might have been taken after she's attacked, but and her back's been broken. That could well be it. But she doesn't look as damaged as she looks in a damaged shot, so that might have been the design. But I doubt it. I think it's probably taken after she's been attacked. So imagine her with straight decks normally, because that's what she was designed with. With regards to the subperiscopes, is there any comparison between a submerged whale and a beach whale? Water is denser than air, so in some respects, would it provide more load-bearing support? To an extent. That's good. Am I right in thinking that the Berg attacker class of the Sea-Free cargo ship based on the Sea-Free cargo ship hull, not converted as such, but a design conversion? To an extent, yes. They are built from the hull up. So rather than being conversion of a merchant ship taken in, they are built from the get-go. As they're built to the merchant hull standards and with the merchant hull facilities, but modified on the design. Oh yeah, so if Italy had built surface combatants, you said getting past Gibraltar was an issue because they had lots of guns. Didn't the English Channel have lots of guns too? Horst, and Prince Jürgen. The density of guns versus the area they could get through in the Mediterranean. Plus, there's the fact that the nicest way they'd have been heading straight to Gibraltar, where there's usually a Royal Navy squadron and some submarines sitting around as well. All things which, yeah. Really, the channel could have done with more of. Hieroglyph. Type 21s were optimized for submerged performance. Type 23s too. Otherwise, yeah, although subs faster on surface than on water. Yeah, then there you go. Interesting ideas. Very few Type 21s actually entered combat during World War II. I don't know. That doesn't look like a lot of damage for being presumably mauled by the Fleet Air Arm, but it's the only explanation. There is another picture if you go to their to the Wikipedia, which suggests it's been very mauled by the Fleet Air Arm. But I don't think they'll be flying a gyrocopter during a storm either. Actually, some of them did try it. We won't get into that one. That's on a completely different topic. But we will get on to some of the nutty things the Germans do in gyrocopters. Maru, Maru is an honorific put on names of civilian vessels in Japanese naming convention. I'm not sure about the exact meaning. In card, Japanese seem to have a repeating habit of supporting flight deck extensions. Why not infill more of this as usable hangar crew space? Honestly, I have no idea. They seem to like that as a policy. And I'm presuming it's because they use those spaces as storage spaces. That's good. Only 2 Type 21s went on war patrol. Neither sank anything. Nick Walters, the Type 23 was the prototype hydrogen peroxide one. Couldn't pay me to take a ride on that. No one wanted to take a ride on that, but I don't think any. Whereas two Type 21s did actually get to do a war patrol but found nothing, I don't think Type 23s actually made it much off the drawing board, if they did make it off the drawing board at all. In car, Japanese seem to have a repeating habit of supporting. Onto the one. Did aren't carriers take it as personally as battleships with their little friends when their little friends got picked on? They did. They were really not happy about it. They really weren't. You okay, large fluff? Hey, what? Yeah, you having a bad dream? Sorry, big fluff having a bit of a bad dream. Okay. Oh, good boy. There you go. So, a bit of patting stops the bad dream, doesn't it? Yes, it does. I don't know. Fluffy research assistants. They're very, very needy. Hydrolift, Type 21 and Type 23 used electric and diesel. Hydrogen peroxide boats were only experimental, never entered production. 23 was the coast of variant 21. Vision. Akagi. The upper flight deck sloped slightly from amidships towards the bow and towards the stern to assist landings and takeoffs. They could have sloped the Shima and Maru as well. No, I'm fairly sure that's damage. I'm fairly sure that is damage. I think they might have broken her back to an extent. I always do love it, and this is speaking as a dyslexic. The German naming convention of submarines does not help me. They planned 960, 63 completed, including those completed after the war. 8 Type 23s were lost to various causes. I was wrong. They had, so let's see, so history. None of the 6 operational Type 23s were sunk by Allied ships, but they sank or damaged 5 ships for a total of 14,000 gross tons sunk. The first war patrol of Type 23 began later in the war, and that was U-2324. Sailed from Kiel on the 18th of January 1945. She managed to sink no enemy vessels. U-2322 under Oberlieutenant C. Friedrich Heckel was the first to achieve some combat success, sailing from Norway on 6th February 1945. Encountered a convoy off Berwick, Northumberland, and sank the coaster Engelholm. And it seems to be vessels from the same base had similar successes. U-2323 was eventually sunk by a naval mine on the 26th of July 1944. U-2331 was lost in a training accident. 2338 was sunk by a British Bro fighter. U-2342 was mined in December 1944. U-2344 was accidentally rammed and sunk by U-23336 in February 1945. 2351 decommissioned in April 1945 after bomb damage. 2359 was sunk by Allied aircraft on 2nd May 1945. And 2367 was accidentally rammed and sunk by an unidentified U-boat on the 5th of May 1945. In early May 1945, 31 Type 23s were scuttled by their crews. 20 surrendered to the Allies and were sunk during Operation Deadlight. And 3 2326, 23253, and 4706 survived the war. Cool. But if you haven't noticed, I do really find the German naming system annoying for their submarines because I have to have my notes on submarines to be able to assure I get them correct because I get the numbers confused sometimes. Right. So we are now onto the Yamashiro class. Yamashara Maru class, and another pair of converted auxiliary escort carriers. These two are operated by the Imperial Japanese Army, though. And this is actually Shigasu Maru post-war. And so, they only managed to complete the Yashima Maru pre-war. Yashima Maru is commissioned in 1945, January 1945, sunk. She's actually commissioned on the 27th of January 1945. She sunk in Yokohama Harbor by US aircraft on the 17th of February 1945. As a result, she's never used as a carrier. Her sister ships Shigasu Maru and Zuno Maru are incomplete when Japan surrenders and are after war converted into tankers. Shigasu Maru was actually sunk in 1945. She's repaired and as a tanker in 1945 and scrapped in Sasebo in June 1963. Zuno Maru was scrapped in Osaka in the 15th of June 1964. They were supposed to carry 8 aircraft. And their aim was they would be carrying Ki-76s. Now, I have a picture of a Ki-76. And we can all decide. A little question from me. Let's get it up. Let's get the Ki-76 up. Now, this is the Kokusuka Ki-76, and I think this looks very, very like quite a lot of Kokusai Ki-76 or liaison aircraft type, basically used by the Imperial Japanese Army, called Stella in terms of Allied reporting name. So that's just getting cruel. They're used as anti-submarine aircraft by the Japanese Army. Mainly aboard the Akitsu Maru. And they're able to carry 2 132-pound, that's 60-kilogram depth charges. Am I the only one who thinks like that looks kind of like a high-wing monoplane version of a Swordfish or an Albacore? It does. I think what else? I remember reading the Type 7 skipper being shown around the Type 21 by his friend, and from that point said he considered Type 7 just a diving tube. Potentially. At Productions, if the snorkel and concept of the Type 21 streaming was put into use in late 1930s, do you think the RN could have made a capable cruiser sub out of that? If it was in the early 30s, they might have had a chance. But probably not. They could have made a large submarine out of it. Nice morning. When you say you'd be heading straight for Gibraltar, isn't Scapa Flow at the northern end of the channel? Didn't the RN have a ship or two there during World War II? Scapa Flow is at northern end of Scotland. Basically, you're in the channel. You're talking about Chatham. You're talking about Portsmouth and Plymouth. And honestly, the Royal Navy's trying to keep as minimal major units in those bases as they possibly can, because honestly, they're not really that good for bomber aircraft coming over them. At least one Type 21 round up in the French Navy. I don't think so. Let's see. Post-war. Yeah. Okay, yes, the French get not. They don't get a Type 23. The British get a couple of Type 23s, one of which gets handed over to the Russians, and the Norwegians get a Type 23. The Type 21s. Hmm. Well, you know, the Type 21s get around, but they're really off the topic for Japanese aircraft carriers, which is what we're doing today. So, what is next? The Japanese Space Force getting their own carriers? Well, if they did, that would be quite an interesting carrier. They would have been old, but would a Malta class have been useful in the Falklands? Yes. Think about what you could have put on an upgraded Malta, especially one which had been slowly built and had been built with an angled flight deck. They're much bigger than Ark Royal or Eagle were going to be. They could have had a much bigger flight deck, a much more usable space. They could have taken far more aircraft. They could have been carrying Hawkeyes. Hello, Bruce Marino. Would not long-range viewing from a surface sub need an optimized lens and hence a second periscope? And would not a minor rolling and pitching make viewing nearly impossible? Thanks. Yes and yes to an extent, to a large extent, but actually the first thing, as I said, was the periscope itself going up, and then you have another piercing in your. You have to have a second periscope for looking around when you're on the surface. That's going to be another issue in terms of piercing your pressure hull. Shumi, after 5 minutes of messing around in a 3D builder, I have a 2 carrier with wing turrets using the IJN Shinano and IJN Aki in 1911. Yes, they look as bad as it sounds. Where should I post the ship's 3D models? Try Discord, but oh, good lord, that's going to be fun. As ever, links to everything down below. So shop, Discord, Patreon, everything is down below. Well, remember, joining the channel down below. Subscribing to the channel, I believe, is down there. Little bell, which you press to get alerts when I do lives, also down there. It reminds me of the Flesler stalk. Yes, that too, but I'm sorry, there's the whole design of the front of the engine mount and propeller reminds me of albacore and swordfish. Hmm. Hmm. If it doesn't, Drac will be doing a talk on the Maltas in the next few weeks. I know, I'm looking forward to it. Where is it? Would the Kriegsmarine have been better off building a serious maritime strike air arm and going after convoys with aircraft rather than the subs? One more planes for the same amount of metal and fuel. They, as we've been over before, the big problem the Germans have on their major ships is their lack of yards to build them. That's their problem. So that's why they don't have carrier. They don't have despite their efforts, they don't have the Graf Zeppelin in service because it's just not viable to build it at the same time as trying to build battleships. They don't have the capability. But no, the Yamashiro Maro class, they are more Japanese army. And this is the other thing. If the Japanese army and navy had actually managed to coordinate at any point during war and actually got on, They could have churned out a nice class of escort carriers together. That's the thing, because they set up two separate construction progresses. And now we have another one, the Kimono Maru. Oh, man. She's a landing craft carrier. Please note, very similar to the other one I talked about earlier. She has only, though, a takeoff only flight deck. She doesn't actually have hangar or sort of landing systems, so she's for takeoff only. She's designed to transport from 8 to 37 aircraft again, depending on their size, and a number of landing craft aboard. She could carry a lot of those. She's basically a Type M wartime cargo ship taken over by the Army during construction, and she can carry, well, she's a Type B landing ship, so she can carry 17.1 meter craft or 14 meter landing craft in her hold. They're launched on rails through the doors at the stern, rather like the Royal Navy has those converted oilers, which have this huge gantry system on top that churns out landing craft that way, up, out, boom, up, out, boom. This one has them it comes at the rear, so instead of having a dock, it just has rails which go through, boom, boom, boom. That woke you up. I'm sorry. You're wondering what Papa was doing. I know. If anyone's just joined us, I have the fluffy research assistant down there. I'm not just talking to myself. However, whilst the deck is 110 by 21.3 meters, it's not large enough to land aircraft on it. In fact, it's really not. As such, no. Although she does survive World War II, and she's used to until 1947 to repatriate Japanese forces. And then she's converted to a conventional merchant ship in 1947 and sold to the Kwaski Kaisen KK line, and ended up being scrapped in 1948. Actually, you kind of are just talking to yourself. No, he talks back. Just his conversation usually is a look at me and a raised eyebrow. Walk out on rails, landing craft from this Kimono. Ron Cash, this is war in my mind. The Japanese army must have been rolling around with more tonnage than the actual navy come the end of the war. There is an argument for that. Second here, in before the Japanese army building battleships and the navy having a strong landing force. That would have been interesting if they had. Remember, the Japanese navy does have their special landing parties. I think what is in my head, the Japanese have light carriers for development training early on, improvised light carriers in desperation. Were they always going to put resources into fleet carriers instead of given the chance? We'll get to that, but they were always trying both because they always realized you were going to need both. In the distances in the Pacific, we think the Atlantic has the tyranny of geography. That the Atlantic air gap is for the Battle of Atlantic is something massive. It's nothing compared to the gaps you get in the Pacific. And you have to remember, the Japanese are one of the foremost anti-submarine warfare forces in World War One, and convoy forces in the end of World War One. They might not see it as that massive glory, a source of glory, and they might see it as off the route of March for the Kantai Kessen and the glorious battle which they were aiming for. But they understand it. They know the problems, and they are thinking about it. They're just not allocating as much resources as they could to in peacetime, probably towards it. Kawasaki. Thank you, Hieroglyph. Kawasaki. They're cool ships. They're an interesting idea, though. They are an interesting idea, and believe it or not, I do know exactly where we are now in this whole interesting journey we're on. And I know what's coming next, and you're going to enjoy what comes next because it answers your questions. Senecanera, you got to remember the Pacific is 1/3 of the planet, as you can take pictures of the Earth with basically only the Pacific on it. Yes, it's colossal. But the Japanese were not, again, without their smart thing going on. You know, rather like the Royal Navy takes from its light fleet carrier, which is of course not a light fleet carrier, HMS Unicorn. And by the way, I would just like to point out, for anyone wondering, one of the few things that has made it through the actual, how do I put this? The actual thing on Spreadshirt is, believe it or not, the HMS Unicorn quote, which I was expecting to be held up completely. That's basically the only thing which has made it straight through. So if you go to it now, the only option that you can find for on the down on my store, if you go to that, is the HMS Unicorn motto, which, as we all know, has the glorious line on it. It's not a carrier, it's a forward aviation support ship of flat deck called HMS Unicorn. Because you all love that line. Anyway, Unryu. They are based on the Hiryu design, which was considered far more practical for mass production than the newer and more sophisticated Taiho or Shikaku class. The Japanese plan 16. They order one in 1941. They're ordering 15 more in 1942. They complete 3. They cancel 13. The 3 completed are Unryu, which is sunk by USS Redfish in 1944. Amagi, which is sunk by an air raid in July 1945. Salvaged and then scrapped some point between December 1946 and November 1947. And then Katsuragi is scrapped between December 1946 and November 1947. Kasagi gets to 84% complete when construction is stopped. And then Aso is 60% complete when construction is stopped. They also start working on a second class, which is even more simplified and sped up construction model of it, which is called the Ikoma class. The Ikoma class Ikoma is actually 60% complete when construction stopped in November 1944. And the interesting thing is there is the debate as to whether the Mitsubishi Nagasaki shipyard was building the Kurama or the Kaimon, which was cancelled on the 5th of May 1944. Now, these were designed with theoretically a top speed of 34 knots, other than Katsugari and Aso, who had a top speed of 32 knots, but designed with a speed of 34 knots. They were supposed to be roughly 17,600 tons to, well, and some were sort of like in standard. They have 104,000 shaft horsepower, roughly. But, well, that's in Katsugari and Aso. In all the rest, it was supposed to be 152,000 shaft horsepower. Hence, they could go 34 knots. So you think about that. Basically the same hull design, and to get an extra 2 knots of speed, you have to add on 48,000 shaft horsepower. They were going to be fitted with guns, radar. They were going to have a sort of little bit of armor. Their plan in 1942 was to be armed with 15 Mitsubishi A6Ms, or zeros, 30 Aki D3As, the Type 99 carrier bomber, and 20 Nakajima B5Ns, the sort of torpedo bomber. So D3s for torpedo for bombing and yeah. However, by 1943, this has been changed to 20 Mitsubishi A7M Repus, which was, of course, the successor to the Zero. 27 Yokosuka D4Ys, and 6 Nakajima C6Ns. And then by 1944, the plan was 27 Mitsubishi A6Ms, i.e. zeros, 12 Yokosuka D4Ys, and 9 B6Ns, Tazans. Because the C6N hadn't really got in. This is the Japanese equivalent of the light fleet carrier. It's supposed to be the thing they can churn out in numbers. If you consider it, it's kind of like what the British did. The British go, looking at the Americans, we would love to build all those yards, but the trouble is our existing ones keep getting bombed. We have a light fleet carrier design. Oh, no, we don't. It's a Ford Aviation support ship, but we can modify that. Light fleet carriers come out, and they churn them out in huge numbers. Cash. Ahem. A carrier repair supply vessel. Yes. Right one. I hate missing these specific videos. Did you all go over the IJNC play tenders? Yes, we did. Are the tones of Mongami in this too? I don't think the tones of Mongami's were covered. Jessica Liu, hello. What's the latest on the book? It's supposed to be out in September, as far as I know. At some point, I'll get some more money for it. I don't know when. Currently, I'm concentrating on getting the edited book through. That's reached its crunch point now, and so I'm hoping my book is the Tribe Brothers and Darings is pushing along nicely. Everything's with the publishers; they seem happy. Yeah. John Klein, ASO was used for kamikaze weapon system before Sonora. My search partner ran into results of the SCAPs for another document. Cool. Adding 48 shaft horsepower. Are they adding an shaft too? That is an interesting question. And please note, I'm saying that is an interesting question because that would be my theory. But all are listed as having 4 shafts and 4 Campon geared turbines. So I have no clue. They could just be low powering for the turbines. That could just be it. they're all supposed to have the same Rogo Campon water tube boilers as well to power those turbines, but I have no idea. It seems to be very interesting what's going on with these designs. Frank's right. These are my favorite IGN. They are my favorite IGN cruisers. We've been concentrating more on the carriers. Hagler, I think the max was 54, which meant about at least 52. Well, you see, here is the thing. The numbers listed, and I know what you're going to say, give it as the Unruh class was planned in 1942 with 57 aircraft fully assembled and 8 aircraft to be able to be basically in part stored in there. By 1944, they're going into operation with 48 aircraft, and I think that's largely because they are short on aircraft, not because they're short on space. They had 104,000 shaft horsepower, so they have to get up to 152,000 shaft horsepower to get to get those 34 knots. Nicholas, we're just searching Spreadshot. You can guess what? We found someone's done a nice Buccaneer t-shirt and sales resistance, Nick. Have we done the hybrid battleship memes yet? No, we haven't done the hybrid battleships yet. Alright. We're getting to them. They are what comes after this. The Unruh class, and then it's the hybrid battleships. But if you don't mind, someone's quickly got up and needs to be open. The door needs to be open for him. So I'm going to give you a full view of this light fleet carrier. I'll be back in a second. Right then. We are back. It's the hybrids you have been waiting for. And Fluffy Research Assistant says, thank you very much, everyone, for understanding that Fluffy Research Assistants do need breaks too, occasionally. It's one thing for me to be here for 4 hours, chatting away quite happily, and not needing facilities. Puppy dogs apparently need them. Okay. Right. Concept. You know, shirt that says same ship, different day, or a picture of a individual British ship, your choice, saying it's a flesh wound, stuff like that. I'd wear it. There are plans for that. There are plans for that one. Dr. C, what do you think about the attempt to have aircraft launched from the Fletcher class? Don't. The destroyers are lovely. They are lovely, but they're very, very small. You need a certain amount of space and length to launch an aircraft. Only 61. 4 shafts and only 104,000 shaft horsepower? That sounds quite powerful for 4 shafts. Yep. Look, it may help to understand. We are studying here the heroic efforts of a dying empire. Everything in their society is falling apart. Thus, lack of aircraft, fuel, trained aircraft, trained damage control, and going to sea under strength. Tragic their heroism, just their war crimes. No. Their war crimes are just absurd. But no, this is what the Isaiah looked like in the 1920s. A perfectly decent dreadnought battleship for that period. A perfectly different one. There's a nice birdie outside. Right. And let's see. If the block construction method of shipbuilding were applied and feasible to light carriers in World War II, how much would that change things? It would have rapidized production absurdly compared to what happened. And if you think about it in Britain's case, if you consider the manufacturing facilities we had inland down large canals that we could have built from, and what you could have accomplished with block construction, you could have assembled huge things in factories a long way from shipyards and then rapidly built them on the slipways. And any time less on the slipway is less time for the enemy to be able to interfere with them. Plus, you can build on the cover, which means you can build 24 hours a day in perfectly controlled environment and with no rain, nothing getting in the way. Ironhand X-ray. Would an I-400 fall under hybrid submarine? Not really. Although free seaplanes does make them interesting. Tagleff, they collapsed, they deserved it. Tragic justice. Don't change. Shoot me. Check the section and great horrific job with 3D models. Oh, good lord. And everyone knows about it. I find it fun. Everyone was planning for war in the mid-40s, and the war decreed it would start in 39. It's Hitler, really, that manages to muck up everyone's war plans, including his own. Because he just doesn't know when to stop. Greg Slasky, we need intermission music. Tempting. For Japan, the war started in the early 1940s. China too. Yep, lots of preparing going on in Spain, Finland, Ethiopia, Italy, Spain too, Manchuria. Yeah, there's all sorts of issues going on. So you can start dating World War II from a lot earlier. And remember, the Royal Navy are fairly certain at certain points that they're going to be fighting the Japanese before the Germans. And in January 1939, with all that's going over Tsingtao, they're pretty much mobilizing the fleet to start to head out to the Far East. They reckon that's what it's going to come to. Where's the trainee assistant? The trainee fluffy research assistant, the trainee assistant fluffy research assistant, I should be saying, is currently inside on my mum's lap, having a cuddle and basically enjoying herself. Seneca, I still want my HMS Victoria slippers. Grunkosh, fluffy research assistant with most navally knowledge canine in the world. I think Harry Bennett has a dog as well, so you know that might she might be up. So I think it's a she. It might be a boy. I can't remember. Frank, what was like for the IJN cruise? Hard. This is the other problem for the IJN as a navy. They're honestly, well, Britain has an interesting approach to class in that we have a historical deference where it comes to class, etc. But you can break through that ceiling. It's difficult, and for women and minorities, it's even more difficult. But you can break through that ceiling. The Japanese one in this period, you really can't break through. It's next to impossible. And I've got a series which is going to be coming up in the second week of September, which is called Axis Chiefs of Staff. And basically, it's my cover because I'm doing these sort of videos just in case I can't do the live that week because of where I am. Because I might be here, I might be somewhere else. If I'm here, it's very easy to do. If I'm the other place, I'm not sure about the facilities, whether I'll be able to do it or not. I'm going to be looking up and seeing. But it's complicated. And the thing is, there is a reason why one of the longest serving, and one of the interesting things is once you look at looking at the Axis Chief Staff, is how many of them are in service for such a long period of time compared to their Royal Navy or US Navy counterparts. You know, the Royal Navy ones are changing every 3 years. The Japanese one, or Herrera, is in service for nearly a decade. They have a huge impact on their navies. I did not write directly enough. Due to character limits, obviously Japan's war crimes were utterly horrific, and most always entirely unjustified. You can bet they were telling themselves the opposite. Yep. We had no choice, or that's, yeah, they do. They have all sorts of justifications in their minds. It doesn't work. John Shea, which hybrid is a good idea on paper but turn out terribly planned out or executed? To the point made by God himself during a drunken coding rampage in Unity game engine. I'm not quite sure, but I think the most disappointing one is probably Ryujo, which we talked about earlier. Because she's designed from the get-go to be converted, and she isn't. When she's converted, she's disappointing. I mean, would you say is a good example of why jumping from Lance Corporal to Supreme Commander and skipping all the ranks experience in between is a poor idea and like perverting? You see, the thing is, a leader like Hitler is technically the civilian leadership, so he's supposed to have political strategic acumen, which is very different from military strategic acumen. He's supposed to be making political calculus. The trouble is he mucks that one up as well. But he's very good. You don't get to be to where you are, or where Hitler gets, without being good at politics and good at judging the politics. Admittedly, well, Weimar Republic is a bit of a special case, and Hate Rise and that is a bit of a special case. But you don't get to be where you are without being good at playing the political game. He's an SHIT. He's a complete nut up SOD. At no point should he have got anywhere near there. And then, honestly, when people go, he must have covered up what he was like. No, anyone could go and read his own book and find out exactly what you're dealing with. But rather like with modern politics, no one ever seems to go and read their book. You want to understand Trump? Read his book. Obama? Read his book. Biden? Don't. But, you know, it's a common thing. In UK politics, thankfully, we haven't got to the point at which politicians publish books about themselves yet, but we have got Boris Johnson publishing regular books about other people. Which, if you want to find out his ideas on leadership, etc., you can go read. Racecar America. Britain had begun rearming really in 1937. France was sort of rearming from about 1937, and he doesn't invade Russia for a lot until well after 1939. No, he just calculated that they wouldn't do anything, and Russia would be happy with invading. But Russia itself holds off invading Poland till after they've beaten up the Japanese. Once they've got the treaty with the Japanese, then they invade the other half of Poland. So it's bad timing even on that front, because he's not waiting till his other principal ally, who's technically supposed to be dividing up Poland with him at that point, we'll call ally. I'm calling them ally because they're dividing up Poland between them, but we all know what Russia, the Soviet Union, and Germany, Nazi Germany, were like with each other's allies. Is pushing it, basically frenemies or alanies. We call them that, alanies. Anyway, they do it. But no one wants war in 1939. No one's ready for war in 1939. The disturbing thing, though, for Germany is if you think about it, with Britain's infrastructure and industry and France's infrastructure and industry and the damage done to Germany's in war capacity, infrastructure and industry, even after they've taken back the Skoda works, etc., and various other things. The longer he leaves it, the more and more disparity will build up in those arms. Because if you imagine, add on, let's say, delay World War II by a year, 2 years, there'll be a whole load of Flag-class corvettes in service. They'll be being built as far away as India, Canada, Australia. It's great for Britain, terrible for Germany. Decision. Sustaining morale and career satisfaction seems to have been a shared problem for the navies of dictatorships. To an extent, yes. Bijan. IJN's I say looks like a USN Wyoming class battleship, but with the main mast between the two rear sets of turrets. To an extent, yes. But this is them as a battleship. And this is really sort of the point. You have forward 4, aft 4, slightly off to the aft 6, and then 12. Don't take this the wrong way, but when the Isaiah class are being built, and I know they are lovely ships, but they are built 1915 to 1918. Right? At this point, the Italians, and I love the Italians, as you all know, I think they are absolutely wonderful navies. No, the Italian dreadnoughts are very, very good. But here is the really important thing. This is the first Italian battleship. Please note, treble 12-inch guns. Now, I realise going treble 14-inch is an order greater than this, and it does have complexities. But, and I say this with great feeling in my heart for the Japanese, they could have made that 4 turrets and have got 6 guns being able to point forward and 6 guns aft, and still a 12-gun broadside on 4 turrets, probably on the same hull space. Because length 505 feet and Dante Alighieri, length, as said, actually 551 feet overall, and beam 87 feet. The Isay, length 683 foot, beam 94 foot. They could have made a far better ship. Now, this is before we even get on to the conversion. But if you'd done that, you could have had the guns, far more space for power. So instead of having 24 water tube boilers, you could have had got more shaft horsepower. And when you reconstructed the ship, you could have gone really fast. And these could have been extra fast battleships for the Japanese. Because they're getting up to 25 knots on 80,000 shaft horsepower. Imagine what they could do with, let's say, just a couple more water tube boilers. That would get them up to 100,000 shaft horsepower. That might get them up to 28 knots. The point is that, again, there is a Japanese conservatism coming into this. And this is, to me, undermines a lot of their construction. And this goes back to the World War I, to the beginning of the Navy. In that, I would say, this one, they, rather than thinking, hang on, what's best for us to build and what fits us best, they're looking at the Americans with double turrets. They're looking at six turrets and double turrets. And they're looking at the Brits with double turrets. And they're thinking, double turrets are the way to go. They're not thinking, hang on, how many ships are we going to build? Who are we essentially going to fight? What do we want to balance? And can we do this more efficiently? Can we do this better? They had the opportunity. They have the quality designers. They have the quality yards. They could do it. They don't. Grace asks you, delay World War II by 2 years and Poland's just finished rearming as well. Yep. Take care, Jane. Hello, Richard Orta. Harrigan, Stalin knew Hitler would attack, did not know when, wanted to delay the inevitable as long as possible. Yes, so he could finish rearming. Justin, what was the final approval date of the ISA class design, and what was their construction capacity capability at the time? Well, again, the Dante Alighieri, is laid down in 1909 and is completed in January 1913. It's launched in 1910. Everyone knew what was coming. The ISA, well, the ISA starts off their design in pretty much April 1913. So if you consider they're ordering their design in April 1913, 2 months after the Dante Alighieri's have been completed. Years after they've been seen to be carrying treble turrets. And they're not laid down till 1914. Yamashiro, the second of two Fuso class, is actually laid down first. And so this delay is the ISAs. They're delayed and delayed. And so you have plenty of time to do this modification and have the same gun. So, and trust me, before anyone starts going, I am just as critical of the Royal Navy, because the moment you have the Italians producing treble turrets, the Royal Navy should have been thinking about it. Because, let's say for Renown and Repulse, you could have, for not much more weight, increased them, gone for treble turrets rather than 3 double turrets. and they would have had 9 15-inch guns. So they would have actually gained a gun compared to their battleship counterparts, and you could probably still got much the same speed out of them. A little bit, maybe you have to put in a little bit more horsepower, a little bit more cost, but you would have still got a very good ship. But they wanted to save money and time and reuse, and they just used the same turrets they already ordered. So they don't think about it. And again, it's my argument with the R class. Again, if you want to save money, build a build free treble turrets. And that'll save you money in your construction. And you still have the space for the extra engines you need to get to the higher speed of the Queen Elizabeths. Probably save money as well in the long run. So I find it strange that the Italians are pushing so much and leading so much in this. Very something. Almes or Annalise, we're going to have to think about this. It would also describe, as you said, the relationship between the IJA and IJN. Illusion seems like the designs are ambitious because they felt they had no ability to stretch further. That's the interesting thing. This is the IJA class. You know, they are preceded by the Fusos. They are preceded. The Fusos are preceded by the Kawashis. And they're preceded by the Satsumas. So this is going to sound strange, but you know, these are ships which, frankly, they could afford to stretch themselves on a bit by this point. My favourite nightmare scenario for World War II is old Adolf chews up Poland with Uncle Joseph, and then the French and the RAF bomb Baku, so the Nazi-Soviet alliance holds up. I'm not sure that really helps the Germans out that much, because their whole thing was invading the Soviet Union for Lebensraum. If they don't have that, then where is Hitler going to go? He's got the sea between him and Britain, and the Soviet Union aren't going to help with that. He can't really go that far into Southwest Europe. He goes as far as he can. He goes through Greece, but after that comes Ottoman Turkey. And does he really want to fight the Ottomans in their own territory? Not really. So it becomes an issue. Think what else? Do the dates look too early for them to have seen the Agincourt, or at least something similar in the bumper Vickers of British battleship catalog? About the same time, but again, they would have probably seen it. And again, this is not that massive compared to the Agincourt. It needs more. Sure. And remember, kids keeping up with carriers is less about making 30 knots in combat and more about 23 knots cruising. Yeah. Grace asking, what's the Japanese apparent dislike of triple and quad turrets for larger caliber guns, potentially a manufacturing technical issue? Well, again, this is the one area where really they're not limited, because you produce the turrets off-site in a factory. So you can build a decent factory that can build them, and then you have to move them to the ships. Now, that's the problematic part, but you can do it by railway, you can do it by road, or you can have a big enough factory set up not too far from the dock, so you can have a huge crane come and roll them along. All these are options. But it's options well within the capacity of the Japanese to solve. It's an engineering problem, not so much a huge space to build a ship problem. A factory to build turrets and guns is going to take up space, but it's nowhere near the size of space you need to build that. GC student, 9 gun renowns, and Fisher gets an all-battle cruiser a year. The Royal Navy unintentionally wins World War II 25 years before it starts. I was asking, Queen Elizabeth with 4 treble 15-inch guns? Sounds yummy. Yep. That's good. A 3x3 arrangement also means you have 2 more guns bearing towards the enemy than any 2 gun per turret design. And being able to throw more shells at the beginning of the engagement, yeah, is good. And so it does. Charging on the Mediterranean with 12, 15-inch guns and going 28 knots with those small tube boilers. The Italians would have been crying. Everyone would have been crying at that point. But honestly, as I said, from the Queen, that's my other problem with the Queen Elizabeth class design, in that we make this big lump with engines and 15-inch guns, and you sort of go, you could have pushed it a bit further. You could have gone for the treble turrets. And then, the R class, we got to save money. Let's drop a turret from the design. Well, they've still got 9 guns, so they've still got more than any other dreadnought previously built. And the Americans going, ah! Yes, I know, I sneezed. You come check on that when he sneezes. Yes, you do. You worry about that. Right then, so let's hope the mic can still hear me, because I have a big fluffy thing in the way. So the ISA class are reconstructed, and when they're reconstructed is the important point, because with a top speed of 23 knots as built, 25 knots as reconstructed in the interwar years, they are pretty useful, but not massively useful battleships. And 12, 14-inch guns, lovely, but again, not going to set the world on fire. So, they get a conversion. Pretty much, the IJN, and the other thing is I love about it is everything's always linked to the sinking of Task Force Z, or Z, or Zod, depending on your perspective. I know I'm British, I'm supposed to say Z, but Task Force Z, but that sounds like Task Force C, so I say Z. And apparently used the IJN to realise that battleships could not operate in the face of enemy aircraft, and required friendly aircraft to air support to protect them. Lovely. It's a lovely idea. So if that's what's driving the creation of the ISAs and the Hyuga as a conversions, why don't they carry fighters? They carry dive bombers, and they carry scout aircraft. I would say that actually this is because the Japanese are losing carriers and are worried about their strike potential, because they are still thinking of the Kantai-Kessen, they're still thinking of decisive battle doctrine, and they know for that, don't they, Fluffy Research Assistant, that what they need is a capable strike wing, and as many strike aircraft in that first strike as possible. So, elaborate conversions are rejected quickly on costs and time. Again, remember that thing of, we can have all the plans, all the great ideas in the world, but if you don't have the money and the time, you can't actually implement them. And it's very much the problem for the IJN. And it's one of the reasons why the Royal Navy has the money, but doesn't have the infrastructure space, so it sends ships to America to get upgraded. It has the ideas, it has the theory, it sends them over there and gets them fixed. And as they're fixed, they get upgraded, and then they come back. It's a very simple system, but again, it's making use of the infrastructure and time that the American yards provide, because the American yards aren't being bombed. The Japanese ones and the British ones are. So, the ISA class ships were selected for conversion because Hyuga had suffered an explosion in turret number 5 in early May that basically meant that she had lost the 5th turret and 6 could not elevate to its full 43 degrees necessary for the long-range engineering and engagements anticipated by the IJN. And the Fusos were technically supposed to follow with this conversion after these two were done. So basically the idea was they were going to take their 4 oldest dreadnoughts in service and convert them to these vessels. Okay. Right. The rear turrets, barbettes, and supporting structures are removed in early 1943. And then covered by 152mm plates salvaged from the middle deck. Openings in the middle deck are covered with armor salvaged from the turrets, and all the 140mm guns are removed, and their casemates and everything's sealed off. And then basically they start adding 127mm turrets. They start adding 25mm guns. Well, they're basically they're twins that are replaced by triple mounts, and 9 more triple mounts are added. So they have 57mm of 57 of the 25mm. Lucky them. And then they get this flight deck, and the flight deck is 70 meters long. And 29 meters roughly wide at its forward end and 30 meters wide at the stern. Again, it's not really long enough. They have a pair of rotating gunpowder propelled catapults fitted at the sides of the hull, following the R superstructure where they have partially restricted the arc of fire from the 2 midships turrets. So these 2 turrets are actually restricted by those catapults. So they have not only restricted arcs of fire, they are also getting in the way of catapult operations and various other things. And if they are being used, then you can't operate aircraft. So you might as well get rid of them. You could make a far more effective carrier by just, think about this, if this continued on all the way to about here. Think about how long it could be if you got it to 2/3 of the ship. You know. As it is, it's 70 meters long. The vessel itself is 216 meters. So if you get over the 2/3, you could get it to 140 meters long. That's actually a decent flight deck. Not massive, but if we compare it to some of the vessels we've been talking about earlier, well, it's 2/3 length of an Unu class. You know, it's not a bad ship. Okay, it's not going to be brilliant, but it's not bad. And with catapults for taking off, you could put in arrestor cables, and you could use it as a landing thing. And you could also carry a lot more aircraft. And this is the really interesting thing, because they're doing all this effort, and it carries 22 aircraft and 2 catapults. Now, the 40-meter long hangar was 20 meters wide forward and 11 meters wide and aft. It was 6 meters high and designed to stow 9 aircraft. And they also had the idea of 2 aircraft being stored on catapults and 3 more in temporary positions on the flight deck, for originally a total of 13. To recover the aircraft, the collapsible crane, formerly on the stern, was moved up to the port side of the flight deck, and another crane was intended on the starboard side, but was never fitted. So they had one crane to basically take the aircraft aboard. And, as said before, I will be getting to them in a bit, their aircraft they have are the D4Y Judies and the Aki E16A Halls. I will get into their proper names late in a second in the next couple of slides. The IJN also used this as a chance to do a lot of work to protect against rudder damage, because after the loss of Hay, they were worried about it, and so they decided to put some protection in there. Right. Ryan Cash, wow, he's a giant. I thought he was a puppy duck lark. No, he's a good boy. He's a full standard poodle. Yeah. I was asking. I think I've written before. King George V also should have had 3 by 315 inch instead of this quad and a double turrets conundrum. Yeah. And as you can see, here is what she looked like in 1943. So, to my mind, they are building these ships literally because They need something which can keep up with the rear fleet and provide it with protection while the fast carriers go ahead, but they also need more aircraft for the fleet. They realize they need more aircraft for the decisive action, for the Kantai-Kessen doctrine, because they start to realize the range of battles. By 1942-43, the Japanese are starting to realize, hang on, these battles are not happening in gun range. We think they're going to be gun range, and that's why we want to keep these long-range guns, but they're actually camping in carrier range, long-range aircraft, which is why, honestly, they should have got rid of that thing, those guns, and made this flight deck massive. And they could have... Nicest way, before people start going, there's no precedent. HMS Furious, in one of her various versions, has decking wrapping around the superstructure. It's not nice. It's not particularly comfortable for anyone. But as I said, you could have had an angled landing strip, which could have been, well, a box 140 meters by roughly whatever width it would have been. You could have had an angled flight deck across the back there for people, things landing. So they could have been landing, let's say, from starboard to port, as you have them on a carrier, and it is not it's a logical solution to actually make these more. And you could have kept the forward guns if you really wanted them. But again, here's the advantage. Imagine if those forward guns had been trebles. They'd have had 6 up front. No one would have bothered about the rear ones. Vision. I would like to see so much see the rear gun fire straight through the hangar. Mm-hmm. Right then. So, now, I made a bit of jokes about them in the recorded view, and the reason I make jokes about them is because, as I said in a comment to Hieroglyph, I think it was, I can just imagine someone having to say to Admiral King, yes, the new hybrid carriers the Japanese have produced will be formed up with an air group of matching numbers of Judy and Pauls, or Paul and Judy's. And I can just imagine that poor, earnest, intelligence officer's face as King starts giggling at him. Let alone if anyone had said that to one of the British admirals. Somerville would have been laughing. Vian would have been going, oh, good lord. And actually, they have really cool Japanese names, because the Aki E16A is called the Zun, or Auspicious Cloud. And it's a reconnaissance float plane, so it can be recovered aboard the ship. And the Yokosuka D4Y Suze is, it's Susie. So why it didn't get the Allied reporting name Susie, I don't know. It's assigned to a different aircraft, but Suze, a Comet. And it's a carrier dive bomber. You couldn't have a more appropriate name for a dive bomber than Comet. You really couldn't. Could you? No. Couldn't have one. What are you up to now? You're going to lick that. You probably want to get down and have more space for it. Only if they call them punch. Ron and Cash. Furious has mess holes bigger than that runway. Quite potentially. But, you know, it would have been worked. It could have been viable. Now imagine the USN makes that with our standards. We don't want to go down with the USN making that with our standards. Zachary Gherkin. Actually, Doc, you said that to me as well. Then I said it to several people, because it's true. They are good ships, and they're good aircraft, but I just... some of the Allied reporting names I just can't get over. Grace, by the way, the Allied code names were deliberately chosen to be a bit silly. I know they were, but again, I cannot understand why they didn't go for Susie for that one. Shumack Helldiver is also pretty good. Yes, Helldiver is good, but that's more because it comes from the Hellcat family. Conan's dad, I am not repeating that story. Shumack, the standards are perfectly good. Why we butcher them like this? Well, this is the point. And the question here that I'm supposed to be answering, and I am trying to answer, is were they worth it? Well, this gives you 22 aircraft on a not very fast platform, that aircraft that can't be recovered on that platform. And the point, I think, the actual decision of how good and sensible it was, is that by November, I think it was, I'm trying to remember what it was, 44 or 45. I think it's 44. Yeah, November 1944. They removed the catapults from them themselves, so they are literally fitted with it for less than 2 years. And in November 1944, they do not suddenly have a whole load of new aircraft carriers coming available. They are loaded with troops and munitions, and then they are diverted. Well, they are sent out for various operations to try and resupply places, but they're diverted to Spratly Islands upon reports of heavy air raids at Manila. Offload their cargo in the Spratly Islands, and they unsail for Linga Island near Singapore. At that point, Haiga becomes the flagship of the 5th Fleet on 14th December. Again, she's no longer being used as a carrier. They're no longer being used as a carrier. They're being used as a battleship division. And this is now a battleship division with that on the back. So they can't fire their guns back. They have all sorts of area. Yes, they've lost the catapult, so they have slightly more firing capability than they had before. They had when they had them fitted. But that's not much. They have gone through all this, and they've basically butchered a battleship. And then the IJN starts to use them to run petrol, rubber, tin, and other strategic materials back to Japan after the American carriers are thought to have departed the South China Sea in Operation Kita. They're escorted by Oida and 3 destroyers, but the Allies learn of their plans, and 15 submarines are positioned along the anticipated route, with 11 more moved in position while the group was en route. Only 3 of them were actually able to attack, and none of them were successful. So the Japanese actually managed to reach Kure. Therefore, after officially that, 4th Carrier Division is officially disbanded on the 1st of March, and the sisters are, and this is 1945, and are reduced to 1st rank reserve ships. On the 19th of March, Kure is, of course, attacked by Task Force 58. Hugo is hit 3 times by bombs, and that kill 37 aboard, 37 men, and wound 52. And from this point on, the ships really become floating anti-aircraft batteries. And this is how they end the war. No. It's a no. You can't know in advance how everything's going to work. In hindsight, you can't know. But the Japanese are experienced enough in carrier and aviation operations. They know what facilities are needed. So they know they're not building decent enough facilities. They're doing the bare minimum to call this a facilities, but it's not even really a hybrid. because honestly, it hasn't got proper carrier facilities and it hasn't got proper battleship facilities. There are British hybrid carrier plans. Let me see if I can find the images that float around the world. Yeah. Here you go. This is the British proposal. And you immediately notice a big difference in this, in that it's got a full-length central flight deck, it's got a hangar, it's got space for its guns. In fact, those guns are, if I remember correctly, 16-inch guns, and it's got 9 of them. So it's basically a combination of an illustrious class armoured hangar carrier and Nelson or Rodney. I do note that owing to the cramping of crew space, a mothership would accommodate at least part of the crew when in port, because there isn't much crew space aboard this ship. It does have the ability to extend its flight deck over the guns, but it has to be withdrawn for them to operate. And you can see the strut positions for the extensions to be stowed and to be put forward. It's a lovely idea, but thankfully no one ever pushes for it. Goodness knows what would have happened if they had. But even that is a more thought through hybrid idea than this. This is the bare minimum. This is what I'm sitting here looking at, is that takes time and effort. And if we go back again, they have these ships they could have put that effort into. The light fleet carriers. They have all sorts of these ones, which are far more capable ships to base your force around than this. So ultimately, they are spending a lot of effort for not enough gain. And you can understand the theory, but again, if it's really about air defense of carriers, air defense of the battle fleet, you would expect them to be carrying fighters, not reconnaissance aircraft and dive bombers. That's not what you carry for air defense. And the Japanese know that. So this is about strike. This is about the Kantai Kessen. In which case, this is not a sensible option. Because these are not going to carry enough to make a difference. They're going to have to, those dive bombers are going to have to land back aboard another carrier for starters. Those reconnaissance planes, lovely. You have 11 of them, but you can only launch 2 at a time. And yes, it takes pressure off your aircraft carrier, but for that you have sacrificed your battleship. Dear student, the IGN did this to the ISO class because they had no value as it was. In which case, don't use them. Send them home, decommission them, and use the crew and money for other things. Shumi, mess around 3D Builder again and put a longer deck and angle deck on longer deck and angle deck onto the ISO. Kind of just a mess of blocks, but gives you an idea of what you're talking about. Thank you. Abfab Shinano was converted fully, and that went well. Mm-hmm. Frederick, it's interesting the IJN considers them obsolete while the RN still uses all the battleships. Yes, but to be fair, the RN's using its older battleships for what? Shore bombardment and convoy escort, where they don't have to be fast. And they are viable. The Japanese aren't doing a lot of offensive operations, so they don't need much in the way of shore bombardment. And their convoying, well, again, these would have been sensible. But if they put more money into their into their escort carriers and been running proper convoys, and being able to run more proper convoys and more fully, these would have been probably very useful securing those convoys against any cruiser or destroyer raids that the Americans might mount. Yes, it's not really proof against, I don't know, submarines, but if the Americans had sent an Alaska in hunting convoys as a sort of surface raider, well, the Alaska wouldn't have wanted to tangle with one of them because they are very well armed with 14-inch guns, and the Alaska is not really designed to take a 14-inch. Sakagan, where did you find this image? I found it actually on Reddit, but it's been around for a lot longer than that. It was produced by 1940s from Popular Mechanics. A very important magazine at the time. I have suggested it as the basis for a ship aboard a ship in World of Warships, but I'm not sure if they actually want to put it in. Frederick Vega, Doctor, you have to give us a heads up so we can avert our eyes. It's not that bad. It's better than that thing. I wouldn't want to be in either one of them, but, It's from like, oh god, the secondary is a triple turret dual purpose. Yes? Right one, half of both, all or nothing. To an extent. What's 92? Measure desperation. To an extent. Turning 343, IJN shouldn't have blundered themselves into Midway with maximum arrogance. You have to remember again, the advantage the Americans have at Midway is the intelligence edge. The Japanese have neither the intelligence nor the institutional, how do I put this? They are hunting for the decisive battle. And because you're going out hunting for the decisive battle, you throw a lot of dice to try and get it. How long was the fixed flight deck on the British design? I'll have to expand it to see again. I'm not really sure. But it appears quite long. And they appear to be carrying quite a lot of aircraft. Let's see. There's a full discussion which goes with it. If I will add a link to it. It's on navalanalyses.com, and I will add a link to it below so you can all go and have a look if you want. Let me just find the YouTube. Yes, they did also give us the Battleship of the Future. I think it was possibly the same article which gave us both of them. The Battleship of the Future and this one. Graham Hanna, sorry to see, I have to unsubscribe, and not because of you, but because of Drac. He needs to stop backing on politically. I was not thinking he's a tactical journeyman because he plays with bows and arrows. Huh? I'm not sure about that, Graham. Whatever you is up to you, but we often, I have to say, as historians, you often work through things. And you have to remember what your limits are, but you also sometimes have to work through things, because the best way sometimes is to try and put yourself in that position and try and work it out so you can understand what they're doing. So I can understand what he does and why he does it. Decision, Dr. Clark, I would agree, but they kept thinking they would eventually get their Kantai-Kessen. They should have just built a destroyer escort fleet and used the fuel and crew for that. Oh, a destroyer escort fleet, that would be useful. And did no one look at a V-shaped flight deck and go, hang on, we can land on and launch at the same time? No. Walt 92, make it a Russian Soviet and they will add it to other warships. I don't know. No, sorry. What about for modern day as an amphibious support ship, flying V-22 and F-35 off it and artillery support with the guns? I'm going to have to make Jamie discuss that. Oh. There you go. Triple screws in an iron carrier. I think the light fleets had triple screws. 23434. Hunting, but also going up north and spending way too much effort on invasion they actually tactically don't need. To an extent, yeah. Turning 343, to paraphrase Parshall, thinking on what they think how the USN would act, instead of considering with what power the USN actually could be able to act with. We're all guilty of that at times. We're all guilty of presuming the enemy is going to fall for our perfect plan. Look at what the British do. As I've said before, there is Cunningham's famous command when the Battle of North Africa has been won and the Germans and Italians are in full retreat of sink, burn, and destroy, and nothing comes to get them. The British presumed the Germans and Italians would behave the same way they did. They didn't think the Germans and Italians learned the lesson that the British lost a lot of ships doing Dunkirk, doing Norway, doing Crete. We don't want to lose our ships. John, this would be somewhat interesting if you replace the main battery with VLS systems. Your thoughts? Well, if I was going to design a modern one, it would be slightly bigger, slightly longer, and I honestly would probably replace the rear gun with a VLS with a hypervelocity VLS system. But I'd probably use Mark 53 VLS on the edge, and I'd make sure that the flight deck was long enough and could be left retracted to launch and recover F-35B, so I'd probably have a ski ramp built on it. And I'd be looking more at something which could carry 24 F-35Bs and about 18 helicopters. But that's just me. Right, is this a crackpot scheme or a good idea poorly executed? It's a crackpot scheme. It's complete utter nuts. In the nicest way, the idea for the battle carrier was that if a battleship arrived, it could defend itself. Here is the first rule. If a battleship gets close enough to your aircraft carrier, it's in gun range. A lot of things have gone wrong. If we look at the various battles where battleships have got into gun range of aircraft carriers, it's when a lot of things have gone wrong, and you have bigger problems than your aircraft carriers not having battleship guns. Now, I have a feeling this was designed by someone who had looked at the incident with HMS Glorious and just thought, right then, this is our insurance against captains being completely nuts in future. And I'm fairly sure the admiral overlooking his shoulder responded with, "In the future, the response to a captain being completely nuts like the Glorious is going to be sacking the captain. It works far better and is cheaper." Shermack, sink, burn, let nothing pass. True. Are these as crazy as Churchill wanting to turn the R's into AA batteries and sound the Baltic? He had many ideas. That was not one of his worst. That was actually a sort of, he was doing that idea, it seems, mostly as a test of what he to try and figure out which of his generals and admirals had fighting spirit or not, and it worked. If you consider the reactions of people, the ones who come back with better proposals, they all seem to get promoted. The ones who come back just saying how terrible it is all get sidelined. One wishes he'd almost done it earlier. He might have got rid of Lord Corkenori earlier. Tony343, was there a crackpot scheme for a Pykrete hybrid? No. Shimmy, what if the CV gets in range of its guns? Again, not supposed to. Again, when HMS Formidable does that to Matapan, she is not supposed to. There is a full admiral shouting very loudly into a radio. Well, I'm not sure he's shouting into the radio, but he's definitely shouting into one of his comm systems, probably to the radio people. That carrier is not supposed to be anywhere near the firing line. Vision, do hybrids work better with long-range only ship missiles than with big guns? I would say big guns don't leave as much FOD over your flight deck. Frank Smarrow, between Scharnhorst and Eisenhower, which one is credited with the sinking Glorious? I think both take it equally. Discord, sack the captain, shoot the captain, same difference. You can sack them far more quickly than you can. Well, far more. Let's put it this way: you can sack them with far less paperwork than you can shoot them. Budguy829, were there any US plans in World War II to do something similar, or was the Iowa hybrid conversion 1980s the first time? It was not, but I haven't found the drawings yet for the US plans, so I'm going to put this out there. If anyone knows where the drawings for the US plans are, please send them to me. There is someone who would really like to look at them. Really like to look at them. Because I don't like the idea going around that it's only the Japanese who consider this, and the Japanese are actually the ones who try and implement it, and they implement it very badly because they're doing a bare minimum conversion, and it just doesn't work. Whereas, honestly, go and look at the link on the British Hybrid Carrier below. Go and have a look at the full write-up in Popular Mechanics. This is produced in February 1943. There is a reason it's coming out in February 1943. And yeah, no one's. They also have I think in the same edition, no, that's in the September 1940 issue, they have the Future Battleship, which has, let's see, I think has, is that no, quadruple double turret on the front, and quadruple treble turret on thing, and then a double turret center, and is all rounded off and just looks obscenely interesting. And they have all sorts of plans for how to deal with torpedoes and shells, and yeah. But Formidable wanted to fight too. She always wanted to fight. That's good. The amount of paperwork depends on how many people are into being there at the time. That's the truth. That which depends upon how nutty the admiral or the captain was being at the time when the admiral shoots him. But hopefully they wouldn't. This discussions like this is why I can never say any of my videos are designed with children in mind, even though I know my little cousins are watching them. Of which I would point out it's almost 9:30, all of you. Okay. I'm reminded by your mums messaging me that at least all of those under the age of 13 are supposed to be in bed by theoretically 9:30, but I'm going to say, as I'm cool uncle, 10. Okay? 10. And just don't do what your uncle did, which was put your phone or light source underneath the pillow, and then carry on reading or watching whatever you want to watch, because that's not good. And especially don't use headphones for that. It's never good when parents find you. So usually, although I would never advise, you only stick it in one ear, not the other, not both, so you can hear if anyone's coming. But again, cool Uncle Alex is in no way encouraging this. Frank's right. What if the Italians tried this? If the Italians, that would have been a really interesting thing, because if the Italians had tried this, it might have actually worked for them. Because knowing them, they'd have been quite sensible about it. They'd have gone, right then, we need a fighter carrier. We need something to provide us with air defense for operations, because that's what they needed. They didn't need really the strike capability. The strike capability came from land bases. That was fine. They could afford to produce a fighter carrier. So they could have probably done that if they'd wanted to. Bitchin and Dr. Locke. Re-missile arm hybrids, but then both the Russians and Italians love them. Even HMS Invincible, RF5, can be considered one. They can all be considered them. They were all originally... Remember, the illustrious Invincible class were supposed to have Sea Dart and Seawolf fitted originally, and there was even some ideas of the next set. But the plan originally was also for slightly... to have all that fitted was actually a slightly bigger ship, which would again have been far more useful, because they were considering possibly a larger ship with, and don't tell this to engaging strategy, but there is an idea that goes around that I got once out of a very interesting naval officer, and have confirmed by another source, a naval constructor, and my dad mentioned this, that there was a plan for maybe a slightly larger version with deck-edge lifts rather than centerline lifts. But it was felt that would be pushing the cruiser boundary and the through-deck cruiser boundary to a large extent. What if the Italians took the Cavour class and did this, or turned them into CVs instead? They could have been interesting, I said. Albira, this connects so much, even though that period is long past, because quite a lot of the problems in modern warfare are problems which are always with us. You need to know, if you ever listen to Builder Trumps, there is the thing that Jamie worries about is us repeating ourselves more often than not. And we have managed to avoid it so far, but we do worry, because one of the things you learn in naval history when you're looking at naval warfare is you always have three problems. One, getting to where you want to go. Two, doing what you don't want to do when you get there. And three, getting home. And the capabilities your ship will require, or your ship or your fleet will require for the first one, is different than what probably require for the second one, is different than what probably require for the third one. And you need to carry all the stuff you need for that. You either need to carry them on the ships, or you need to be able to rearm and reload the ships on the move. So this means you get a lot of similarities through history. And I would argue the hybrid aircraft, a battle carrier, is an example to, you need the firepower to guarantee you're going to get to where you want to launch the strike. or want to take part in a bombardment or fight the battle, and then you need to be able to get home as well. And the big fear was always that you won a battle, but then you got airstriked on your way out, and you lost the war because of it. Or you got airstriked on the way in, so your force, which was actually fighting the battle, was no longer strong enough. All right, to be honest, I'm planning going to bed near 2200 of those. Good times. Hi, Jack Ray. Vision. Hybrid Warship. The Amalgamation of Big Guns and Aircraft hardcover. March 1st, 1991 by R.D. Lehman on Amazon. It's an interesting book. Decision. They're my nieces. They're my little nieces. I have a few little nephews, but they're all too young. None of them are watching my YouTube channel yet. They're all very, very young. Although I haven't managed to take them out to on any trips for the last couple of years, but I'm planning on a future trip once things have got a bit more normal. I am planning a sort of cool uncle trip out, probably taking them down to Portsmouth Historic Dockyard because I haven't taken them there in a while, and they love having fun there. And they don't climb the rigging; they've been well trained. They don't climb the rigging, unlike my students. Shumi, looking at the torpedo defense on the battleship, and I have a question about it. If torpedo goes under the ship, would that not be worse? Oh, don't get me started on that. It's popular mechanics in 1940. Don't get into it. It will just sound nutty. And theoretically, that's the whole reason for the bulges and the water mattresses and all the other things they have there to try and make it better. But I'd say their particular idea for how deep the torpedo is running is pretty shallow. That's good. Both how nutty the captain was being and how vengeful the admiral might be when the people who were there tell anyone that the captain didn't shoot himself 6 times. Yes, but there again, this is an Admiral Duncan situation, in which case probably no one's going to argue. Actually, the Italians do this in the Cold War, to an extent. Andrea Doria, yeah. Given the relatively small size of Med, could the Italians not have used catapult fighters which then recovered land, since they don't need to fuel for cap? Theoretically, but then you have to organise that, and you have to make sure you are in an area where they can get there, and they need the... Sorry, Moppy, you're not getting anywhere near my books. Window closed. You have to make sure they're not getting anywhere near out of range. So it's navigational issues. If you're a single-seat fighter that's catapult launched, recovering back to a land base is always a theory, but it's it becomes quite impractical quite quickly. All right. You mean you didn't take the approach of teach them how to properly climb rigging? Also, where is it the students muck up? I have taught them how to properly climb rigging. I've also taught them not to climb rigging on historical ships. They climb rigging quite perfectly, quite capably on ships which are more modern, and they can do that when they're designed to. And I have actually a few of them. I managed to get on the Amerigo Vespucci when it came to visit last time. Italian naval sailor training ship. It's a cool one. Destroyer picks them up. Picks up the pilots anyway. Right. So, what have we got coming up? We have a lot coming up. We had the Raid of Mankin Island, Battle of Atlantic Escorts, and Japanese Hybrid introduction today, this week. And we have Naval Fire Support of World War 1, Western Front, Long Patrol, M7, the M15 class, coming on next week. And then we have 26th of August, World War 1 Armoured Cruisers introduction. And then, of course, we have a live, which is Patron 31, Armoured Cruisers in the Mediterranean, World War 1, Actions, Losses, Kills, and Impact. And we have all this stuff coming up. We also have the 11th to 21st of September, Chiefs of Staff of the Axis Navies, which will include potentially a live, I've marked it in on the 16th of September for Carl Donitz on his birthday, and to look at the others. But, and I say this in the nicest of ways, if I'm at home, that's viable. Where I might be, it could be iffy. So we'll see. 9640, where do students muck up with climbing rigging? They always seem to think the rope is going to be more taut than it actually is. And they seem to, the moment it starts sagging or moving in the wind in any way, shape, or form, they get very, very worried. All right, then. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to everyone for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you for those people who subscribed. Thank you for those who liked the videos. Thank you for those who share the videos. Thank you to everyone who does a super chat whenever they can. It's always very greatly appreciated, mainly because it goes in my takeaway fund, which is always nice to have. Although currently I'm trying to dart a bit at the moment, so I'm not getting takeaways that often. And yeah. Oh, you're looking at me adoringly, but I know you're not looking at me adoringly. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you from the fluffy research assistant, although currently he's more focused on getting a biscuit. Oh, all right. All right. That's good. A catapult launch fighter can recover to land, assuming it doesn't take damage in the engagement it was launched to take part in, and the damage becomes a very big risk for the pilot. True, it also becomes a navigational risk for the pilot. It was on HMS Warrior in Portsmouth that they got caught in the rigging. Momo Kyo, very interesting stream. Thank you. Next one. New Osprey books next year. Dual Series, British Commonwealth Cruiser versus Italian Cruiser in Dual Series, and Royal Navy Torpedo Bombers versus Axis Warships. Fun times. Thank you, Greg Sarsky. Thank you, Calvin Gasberg. Thank you, Peter Dawson. For some RAF Hurricane pilots on catapult on merchant ships, it was the only option other than going for a swim after ditching. Yes. And quite a lot of them ended up doing a swim after ditching. Thank you, Rick Vasava. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, DGV40. Thank you, Shumi. And Vision. Great Britain is the 9th biggest island in the world. Good night. True. Good night, Roland Cash. And Turning 3434. God is priority. All right. Good night, Roland Cash. Good night, everyone. And our glorious video. Hope the subscribe ratio to unsubscribe is 100 to 1. No. The subscribe ratio to unsubscribe watching my videos is about 1 to 4 in the other direction. So I have about 4 times as many unsubscribed viewers watching my videos as subscribed viewers at the moment, I think. Thank you, Zachary Garkin. Victor. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. And I'm going to add, before I go, just as I'm quickly getting this up so I can get some stats up for everyone if they are asking. Let's see. Concurrent viewers. Yeah. We have peaked at roughly 74. No, yeah. 74 concurrent viewers this evening. Thank you very much for watching. There are currently 54 viewers, 41 likes, and thank you everyone who has liked. There is currently 63 concurrent viewers at the moment, actually. Or 53. It's changing constantly, and just thank you everyone. Thank you. Take care everyone. Thank you very much.